the mental transmitter of Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1. Hey, men, are you okay? Zhang Xuan opened his eyes, somewhat bewildered. Feeling excruciating pain all over his body, he was stunned. Why am I not dead yet? Zhang Xuan remembered being surrounded and trying to escape, but in the end, he only saw a proton bomb explode next to him, and then his body gradually collapsed. Hey, men, are you okay? Do you need help? The same voice echoed in Zhang Xuan's ears again. Only then did Zhang Xuan realize that the other person was speaking English, not Chinese. What was even more shocking was that he, who had never been good at English, could understand it clearly. Struggling to stand, Zhang Xuan saw a thin blonde boy standing next to him, his blue eyes gleaming with concern. Hey, do you need to be taken to the hospital? Zhang Xuan looked around and found himself in an alley lined with red brick houses that only appeared in movies. Beyond the alley was a 4-meter-wide street, deserted and deserted. Suddenly, a vintage black car slowly drove by. Zhang Xuan was stunned by the sight. Someone was driving this car? Where is this place? A flash of panic flashed in Zhang Xuan's eyes. He turned to look at the blonde boy beside him and asked anxiously, "What time is it now?" The blonde boy raised his wrist, checked his mechanical watch, then turned back to Zhang Xuan and replied, "Dutch cinema. It's 3:15 p.m. Dutch cinema? What place is this? And what year is it?" Zhang Xuan had never heard of the name. He tried to think, but the moment he tried, his brain felt like it was being drilled by a power drill, causing severe pain. "You're not from Brooklyn." The blonde boy looked at Zhang Xuan with some confusion, as if he was skeptical. "Brooklyn? This is New York." Zhang Xuan looked around in disbelief. He had been to New York before, even urinated on the torch of the Statue of Liberty, but the New York he remembered was so bustling and bustling. How could it be so desolate now? Suddenly, Zhang Xuan had a thought. He excitedly grabbed the blonde boy in front of him and shouted, "Tell me, what year is it now?" 1940. The blonde boy, frightened by Zhang Xuan's sudden madness, took a step back. 1940. Zhang Xuan was stunned. 1940, wasn't World War II? How did I end up here? Are you okay? Do you need a doctor? Seeing Zhang Xuan slump to the ground, the blonde boy hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, asking worriedly. Zhang Xuan seemed oblivious to the blonde's words. His lifeless eyes suddenly lit up, and a flame suddenly ignited within him. Oh, right, my telepathy. At this thought, Zhang Xuan immediately tried to activate a supernatural power, but as soon as he focused, he felt as if his head had been hit by a sledgehammer. As expected, his head felt dizzy, his eyes darkened, and Zhang Xuan passed out on the spot. When Zhang Xuan awoke from his coma, he found himself lying in the hospital. The blonde boy sat in a chair beside him, pencil in hand, sketching something in a notebook. "Thank you," Zhang Xuan said, sitting up in bed and looking at the blonde boy with heartfelt gratitude. The blonde boy quickly put away his pencil and notebook, looked at Zhang Xuan with surprise, and said, "Oh, you're finally awake. You've been asleep for 3 days. I can't believe it, 3 days." Zhang Xuan hadn't expected to sleep for 3 days. Just as he was about to thank him again, the blonde boy spoke again. "By the way, where are your family? I've been looking for them for 3 days. And I can't find them. And I don't even know your name." The blonde boy smiled, walking over to the bedside, extending his hand. "By the way, I'm a little late to introduce myself. My name is Steve Rogers." Zhang Xuan was stunned by this and was about to speak when a flood of information suddenly flooded his mind, all memories from this life. Alex Zhang was Zhang Xuan's name in this life. Zhang was named after his mother, a gentle and peaceful woman from China. Alex, according to his memories, was the name of his father, whom he had never met. Of course, this was his mother's suggestion. Perhaps haunted by Alex Zhang's lingering spirit, or perhaps driven by regrets from a past life, Zhang Xuan's mind reeled from the image of that gentle, serene woman. This great mother, though never seen in person, Zhang Xuan could sense her love and care for her son in his memories. But fate had it all wrong. 3 years earlier, his once great and kind mother had passed away, and Alex Zhang's personality had changed drastically, lost in grief. 3 days earlier, while drunk at a bar, he had angered a policeman and was cornered and beaten to death in an alley. He was then possessed by Zhang Xuan, a figure who had traveled from 2014. Zhang Xuan and Alex Zhang had similar experiences, and recalling Alex Zhang's life, he felt a deep empathy. Tears streamed down his face as he sat on his bed. "What's wrong with you?" Steve looked at Zhang Xuan nervously, unsure of why he had suddenly burst into tears. "From now on, I'm Alex Xuan Zhang." Zhang Xuan calmed himself and quickly accepted his current identity. He glanced at Steve Rogers, wiped the tears from his face, and slowly said, "Hello, I'm Alex Xuan Zhang. As for my family, they're all gone." Alex's only family was his mother, a gentle and peaceful woman. As for his father, whom he had never met, Alex never acknowledged him, and neither did Zhang Xuan. "I'm sorry," Steve apologized, somewhat bewilderedly, while offering words of comfort. "Our loved ones are gone, but we're still alive. We must live well, so they won't worry in heaven." "Thank you, I will live well." Alex Zhang didn't survive the grief, but Zhang Xuan did, knowing that living well was the best way to repay them. "Steve, is that kid awake?" Just then, a handsome, tall man pushed open the door and walked in, his towering figure almost touching the door frame. "Bucky, this is Alex Xuan Zhang." "Alex, this is James Barnes. You can call him Bucky, he's my good brother." Steve hurried forward upon seeing the arrival, pulling Bucky to the bedside and introducing them both with a look of delight. "Hello, Alex." Bucky nodded and greeted, then began to complain, "You're finally awake." "Steve and I have been stuck in the STEM hospital for 3 days." Zhang Xuan could only thank them profusely. These two were his saviors. "Steve, Bucky, thank you." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Xuan was stunned. Why did these two names sound so familiar? Steve Rogers, Bucky Barnes, weren't these the good friends of Captain America and the Winter Soldier? Chapter 2. It's a Marvel World. Looking at the short, skinny Steve and then at the muscular Bucky, they truly seemed like younger versions of Captain America and Bucky. Zhang Xuan didn't make a decision immediately. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, Zhang Xuan consoled himself. "Steve, what did the doctor say? How many days does Alex need to stay in bed?" Bucky, oblivious to Zhang Xuan's expression, turned to look at Steve, who barely reached his chest. A vague, yet strange, expression crossed his handsome face. "I'm fine." Zhang Xuan quickly threw back the covers and jumped out of bed. Hospitals are always expensive, no matter where they are. He was broke, and his hospital stay was probably paid for by Steve and Bucky. Discharging early would save him some money. Steve, however, reached out to stop Zhang Xuan as he was about to leave, anxiously saying, "You just woke up. How could you expect to heal so quickly?" Zhang Xuan was filled with gratitude, but he would rather die than continue staying in the hospital. Partly because he was worried about the money, and partly because he had a deep aversion to hospitals and truly didn't want to stay any longer. Seeing Zhang Xuan struggling, Steve stopped trying and accompanied him out of the hospital. As for the medical expenses and hospitalization fees, Zhang Xuan secretly inquired and found that Steve had indeed paid for them. "Steve, I'll pay you back soon." Leaving the hospital, Zhang Xuan took a deep breath, taking in the smell of a coal smoke that permeated the air. It seemed even better than the smell of medicine in the hospital. "Don't worry," Steve waved his hand nonchalantly, then asked, "Alex, where is your home?" "Let's take you back." "Home," Zhang Xuan repeated, his mind suddenly popping up, the home Alex hadn't been back to for 3 years. Perhaps it was time to go back and take a look. Thinking this way, Zhang Xuan casually mentioned an address. After he finished speaking, Zhang Xuan noticed that Steve and Bucky were both looking at him in surprise, as if with a hint of suspicion. Zhang Xuan couldn't help but ask, somewhat puzzled, "What's wrong? I never thought we were neighbors." Steve and Bucky exchanged a look of disbelief. "We grew up down the street together. How come I've never seen you before? We just moved here 3 years ago, and not long after, she passed away. I haven't been back since." Recalling those 3 painful years, Zhang Xuan's heart ached again, for Alex and for himself. Steve looked at Zhang Xuan with a look of guilt, and after a long silence, he said, "Let's go home together." After seeing Steve and Bucky off, Zhang Xuan stood at the door of his former home for the better part of an hour before pulling a key from a red string dangling from his chest. Touching the key, still warm from his body, Zhang Xuan took a deep breath, seemingly resolving himself. He inserted the key into the keyhole and gave it a gentle twist. The lock cylinder swung with a crisp, yet slightly stiff, sound, and the door, sealed for 3 years, opened once again. Zhang Xuan gently pushed open the door and stepped inside. Uninhabited for 3 years, the room was already covered in dust and cobwebs. His every move created a sandstorm, causing Zhang Xuan to cough repeatedly. Finally adjusting to the dusty environment, Zhang Xuan turned and looked around, carefully examining everything in the room. It was a living room with a well-worn black leather sofa, a cupboard, a long table, a few chairs, and a long broken clock in the corner. The living room connected to the open kitchen, a small kitchen with a few neatly arranged cooking utensils and a glass cabinet next to it, containing several sets of tableware. On the other side of the living room were 2 doors, one for Alex's room and the other for his mother's. After standing still for a moment, Zhang Xuan began to move. He didn't want to abandon this home, he wanted to clean it up to welcome his new life. After 3 hours of busy work, Zhang Xuan finally stopped. The house, once covered in dust and cobwebs, was now completely renovated. Lying sideways on the sofa, Zhang Xuan turned his head to look at a photo frame on a sideboard. It depicted 2 people, a woman with a gentle, sweet smile and a half-grown boy. He smiled faintly and said, "Mom, I'll live well." Returning to 1940, Zhang Xuan didn't feel too much reluctance. He felt sympathy for Alex and accepted his identity. He also admired the woman in the photo, who had single-handedly raised Alex and amassed a considerable fortune. She was a great woman, worthy of Zhang Xuan's respect. Just as Zhang Xuan was lost in his thoughts, a knock at the door suddenly rang out. "Who'd come to see me?" Zhang Xuan wondered, but he stood up from the sofa. He opened the door and was surprised to see the 2 people standing there. "Why are you here? Haven't you had dinner yet? Let's go together." Bucky put his arm around Steve's shoulder and, without allowing Zhang Xuan to object, pulled him out. As they walked, Bucky couldn't wait to talk about his plans, extremely excited. "After dinner, we can go see a movie. Waterloo Bridge. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Vivian Lee, my favorite." Hearing these 2 familiar words, Zhang Xuan suddenly laughed. "Maybe I can make a career in Hollywood." With the advantage of 70 years of experience and countless film viewings, Zhang Xuan believed he could make a name for himself in Hollywood. Dinner was simple, as the 3 of them were focused on upcoming films. Steve and Bucky wanted to see Vivian Lee, while Zhang Xuan wanted to see what movies of this era were like. Only after fully understanding them could he determine if he could make a career in Hollywood. When they arrived at the cinema, it was already packed. After struggling for a while, they finally found their seats and quickly sat down, their faces filled with anticipation. "When does the movie start?" Zhang Xuan waited for a long time, but the movie still didn't start, feeling a little surprised. "A little while," Steve said, without turning his head, his eyes fixed on the screen before him. Black and white images played on the screen, but they weren't movie footage, they looked more like recruitment propaganda. World War II had already broken out in 1940. Although the United States hadn't officially declared war on Germany, some pre-war mobilization had already begun. Zhang Xuan naturally had no interest in this. He looked around at the crowd filling the small theater, and a strange sense of pride suddenly rose in his heart. "You'll see my movies someday." After the movie, 2 hours had quietly passed. A crescent moon hung in the sky, and the day's heat was dispelled by the cool night breeze, even bringing a slight chill. No mistakes, 1 song, 1 release, 1 content, 1 book, 1 bar. Leaving the theater, Zhang Xuan and the other 2 remained silent. The poignant and sad story of love had left them all feeling a little depressed. "Let's go have a drink," Bucky suddenly said after walking along the street for a while. In the past, Steve would have objected, but today he didn't, nodding in agreement. Zhang Xuan hadn't expected a movie to make him so upset, and he hoped to soothe his feelings with a few drinks. The 3 of them found a nearby bar, went in, ordered drinks, and settled down in a corner, slowly sipping. No one spoke, the 3 still absorbed in the movie. "If I were Roy, I wouldn't have left. I would have married Mara," Bucky said melancholy after several drinks. Steve sympathized with Mara's plight, but he disagreed. For the sake of country, personal feelings can be put aside. Roy is a soldier, and obeying orders is his duty. How could he disobey them? Watching the 2 arguing, Zhang Xuan raised his head, downed his drink, and said with a gloomy expression, "If there hadn't been war, none of this tragedy would have happened. Roy and Mara would have lived happily together. War, I hate war." Thinking of the recent outbreak of World War II and his father's death in World War I, Steve's expression darkened. "I heard the new Stark Expo is about to begin. Are you interested in going?" Bucky noticed Steve's expression and quickly changed the subject. Stark Expo, Zhang Xuan asked in surprise, his eyes glazing over. Yeah, it's the Stark Industries Expo. There's a lot of new and exciting stuff there. Let's go together, Bucky, not noticing Zhang Xuan's expression, continued. I also heard that Howard Stark is planning to invite Vivian Lee to the expo. Howard Stark, it really is him. Hearing Bucky's name, Zhang Xuan's shred of hope vanished completely. Only one thought remained: this world is truly the Marvel Universe. Chapter 3: Teleportation. Zhang Xuan had no idea how he'd made it back to his new home. He was completely dazed. Lying on the sofa, staring unfocused ahead, countless scenes swirled in his mind, both Zhang Xuan's and Alex's. In his previous life, Zhang Xuan was the most popular homebody on Earth. His only unique feature was that he was a psychic, possessing the ability of teleportation. Leveraging his teleportation abilities, Zhang Xuan had no fear of discovery. He accomplished many things, such as bringing back Chinese artifacts from the British Museum and burning down the Yasukuni Shrine in Japan. Later, Zhang Xuan finally crossed the line with the wrong person and was surrounded and attacked. His teleportation abilities were blocked by a special device, leaving Zhang Xuan unable to escape. Ultimately, his body was completely destroyed. But what puzzled Zhang Xuan was how he'd ended up in 1940, specifically the year of the Marvel Universe. Oh, right, my superpower. Puzzled, Zhang Xuan suddenly stood up from the sofa. 3 days ago, Zhang Xuan had tried teleportation, but it had failed. He had fallen into coma and slept for 3 days. He'd been so busy all day that he hadn't had time to try it out yet. Now that he had a moment, Zhang Xuan had to experiment. The Marvel world wasn't the real world, it was filled with powerful enemies. Having a life-saving skill was crucial. However, after his first experience, Zhang Xuan didn't rush into it. He didn't want to experience the pain of a drill drilling into his brain again. So, instead of teleporting across a large distance, he focused on the room. Zhang Xuan stared intently at the cabinet a meter away, his mind racing. It felt like needles were pricking his head, and the pain was so intense that sweat broke out on his forehead. Zhang Xuan didn't pause, knowing that this was a necessary process for teleportation, and that the pricking pain would subside after he got used to it. Suddenly, the pricking pain subsided, and Zhang Xuan found himself standing in front of the cabinet, less than a centimeter away. Success! Zhang Xuan was thrilled, a smile spreading across his face. It only took a moment to grasp the meaning. Teleportation wasn't a supernatural ability, but rather a special ability innate to Zhang Xuan, etched into his soul. Since Zhang Xuan had traveled to this world through his soul remained intact, and his teleportation ability naturally remained intact. Furthermore, since his soul was intact, his past life experiences greatly facilitated Zhang Xuan's renewed practice of teleportation. That night, Zhang Xuan remained awake, completely immersed in his teleportation training. With over a decade of experience from his past life, he quickly mastered the technique, and his teleportation ability was nearly restored to its previous level. He no longer needed any photos, he could travel anywhere simply by thinking. The only drawback was that, perhaps due to the time travel, Zhang Xuan's teleportation power had been greatly weakened, not as powerful as it had been in his previous life. This significantly limited the distance and intensity of his teleportation. Currently, Zhang Xuan could only teleport a maximum of 1 kilometer, and only every 3 minutes, otherwise his soul would not be able to withstand the strain. At daybreak, Zhang Xuan used teleportation once more, reappearing at the cinema where he had been the previous night. The cinema was deserted in the early morning. The large curtains had been drawn, revealing the red tabletop beneath. Zhang Xuan glanced around, his lips curled up slightly in a faint smile. He then vanished from his spot, reappearing in his new home. Filled with excitement, Zhang Xuan lay down on his bed and soon fell into deep sleep. When Zhang Xuan was awakened by a series of crisp knocks on the door, the sun was already high in the sky. The sunlight shone through the glass window onto Zhang Xuan's chest, carrying a strong, scorching heat. The summer sun was still very harsh. Alex, time to get up. Hearing Bucky's call from outside, Zhang Xuan leaped out of bed, glanced out the window, and said in a deep voice, "Marvel World, here I come. Superheroes, here I come." After a quick tidy, Zhang Xuan vanished from the room, reappearing standing by the door. Slightly adjusting his still wrinkled clothes, Zhang Xuan opened the door and looked at Steve and Bucky outside, a faint smile spreading across his face. "Good morning, Steve, Bucky, it's almost afternoon," Bucky pouted and whimpered. "Alex, you didn't sleep in until now, did you?" Alex shrugged nonchalantly. "I was so tired yesterday. I cleaned all afternoon and played late tonight. I'm still sleepy," Zhang Xuan yawned again. "Alex, you're just getting better. Make sure you get some rest," Steve said, looking Alex up and down, a concerned look on his face. Zhang Xuan was well aware of his own body. The beating he'd received 3 days ago wasn't serious. His coma was entirely due to his reckless use of teleportation, resulting in insufficient psychic energy. He'd recovered after 3 days of sleep. Steve, however, was clearly concerned about him. Zhang Xuan thanked him and ushered them into the room. "Please feel free to sit down. What brings you to me, Stark Expo? You haven't forgotten, have you?" Bucky said, reclining on the sofa, tilting his head as he looked at Zhang Xuan, who was about to pour him some water. "It starts tonight, and we need to get there now, or we'll miss out on a good seat." Zhang Xuan nodded and said, "I remember, but is it really necessary to go so early?" Zhang Xuan had originally planned to use this afternoon to write stories about classic films from his past life and sell them to Hollywood to make money. He still remembered the money he owed Steve. "Of course we have to go early. You know, Stark Expo is always packed. If you go too late, you won't be able to see anything," Bucky said seriously, fearing Zhang Xuan wouldn't believe him. Zhang Xuan hesitated. All the high-end designs on display at the Stark Expo seemed quite lowbrow to him, so he had no interest in attending. But Bucky's invitation was one he couldn't refuse. As he hesitated, Zhang Xuan suddenly had a thought, remembering something Bucky had mentioned yesterday. "Bucky, is Vivian Lee really coming to the expo?" "Of course. The posters are up," Bucky said excitedly, sitting up with an excited smile on his face. "Okay, let's go now." Zhang Xuan smiled and nodded, mentally pondering how to approach Vivian Lee at the expo. Stories don't have to be written out. Telling Vivian Lee directly might be more effective. P.S. I'm really at a loss for words regarding the formatting. I changed the first and second chapters the same way. Why is the second chapter better, but the first chapter is still the same? Why? Chapter 4. Alex Zhang. Crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, Zhang Xuan and the other two arrived in Manhattan, New York's bustling district, where the Stark Industries Expo would be held. Located in an industrial park built by Stark Industries, Zhang Xuan hadn't eaten since dinner last night, and his stomach was already growling with hunger. He bluntly said to Steve and Bucky, "Maybe we should get something to eat." "Listen, my stomach's growling." Steve, a thin man, was working out hard to meet the draft requirements, and he was a big eater. Zhang Xuan's words also made him feel hungry. He nodded and said, "How about going to Chinatown and trying some Chinese food?" Bucky glanced at Steve, knowing he was being considerate of Zhang Xuan, and didn't mind. He smiled and said, "That's a good idea. Come to think of it, I haven't tried Chinese food yet." Zhang Xuan was stunned at the moment. When he heard the word Chinatown, images of Alex's memories, fragments of Chinatown, emerged in his mind. It turned out that when Alex was very young, he and his mother had lived in Chinatown for a long time. Later, due to some events, they moved out. However, for some reason, Alex seemed to have deliberately buried this memory of Chinatown deep in his memory. If it hadn't been mentioned by chance, Zhang Xuan would probably have never known about this story. A hint of doubt arose in Zhang Xuan's heart as he followed Steve and Bucky towards Chinatown. Entering Chinatown was like stepping back into the era of the Republic of China. The streets were filled with longgons and cheongsims, a stark contrast to the New York City just a few meters away, a feeling of alienation. Alex's features were perfectly inherited from his mother, a typical Asian appearance, only more delicate and handsome. Walking in Chinatown, he didn't stand out. However, Steve and Bucky in front of him stood out a little. During this period, racial discrimination in the United States was still very serious. Asians were even inferior to blacks. It was no wonder the two white people in Chinatown attracted attention. Zhang Xuan sensed something was amiss in the looks and quickly stepped forward, standing in front of Steve and Bucky. He even exchanged a few deliberate jokes with them, assuring his fellow comrades that they were his friends. Sure enough, upon seeing Zhang Xuan's actions, everyone ignored him. Only a few elderly people, their hazy eyes fixed on him, stared intently at him, a sight that gave Zhang Xuan a chill. After a few steps, an elderly woman, leaning on a cane and hunched over, emerged from a street-side porch. She stopped in front of Zhang Zhuan, staring him up and down for a moment before asking, her voice trembling, Zhuan, are you Zhuan? Hearing the familiar Chinese accent, Zhang Zhuan froze. Looking at the elderly woman before him, countless images suddenly flooded his mind. After a long pause, Zhang Zhuan hesitantly called out, Grandma. It turned out that Alex had a Chinese name, Zhang Zhuan, in addition to his English. Recalling the memories, Zhang Zhuan marveled at the strange coincidence of fate. He had actually traveled through time and space to possess the same name and surname. Even more ridiculous was the fact that he had eagerly chosen a name for himself, Alex Xuan Zhang. It was a strange name. Hey, old Mrs. N responded loudly, then straightened up and shouted at the top of her lungs, Zhuan is back. Zhuan is back. With that cry, the entire Chinatown seemed to tremble. Soon, Zhang Zhuan and the other two were surrounded by a group of Chinese people. Steve and Bucky were so frightened that they quickly assumed fighting stances, ready to strike. Zhang Zhuan stopped Steve and Bucky from striking, whispering, don't worry, they know me. Even as he spoke, Zhang Zhuan felt a deep sense of frustration. They knew him, but he didn't. Alex's memories of Chinatown seemed to have been deliberately forgotten, leaving Zhang Zhuan standing there, dumbfounded, watching the enthusiastic compatriots around him. Zhuan, how's your mother? After a moment of clamor, old Mrs. N asked again, her trembling voice carrying a hint of inexplicable meaning. Zhang Zhuan's face darkened upon hearing this, and he said in a low voice, Grandma, my mother passed away 3 years ago. Mrs. N paused for a moment, then sighed deeply, it's good that she's gone, it's good that she's gone. She didn't have to suffer in this world. Then, looking up at Zhang Zhuan, she said with some sadness, it's just hard for you, child. Zhang Zhuan shook his head and said nothing. From the unconscious sighs of relief from the people around him, he felt as if they were hiding some secret, a secret about his mother. Zhang Zhuan tried to recall it, but searching Alex's memory, he could find no clue. Zhuan, what are you doing back this time? A middle-aged man carrying a sack asked with a silly smile. Zhang Zhuan didn't pursue the matter any further. The secret would eventually come out, and he would slowly uncover it when he had the chance. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, Zhang Zhuan smiled and said, hello, Uncle Yi. I haven't had authentic Chinese food in ages since Mom passed away, so I wanted to come back and give it a try. Zhuan, come on, I'll have your uncle and cook for you. Just tell me what you want, old Mrs. N said, clapping her cane and speaking with full energy. Upon hearing old Mrs. N's words, those who had been about to invite Zhang Zhuan to dinner suddenly paused, exchanging a few traditional Chinese pleasantries before dispersing. Zhang Zhuan was taken aback at first, then realized that old Mrs. N's husband was a royal chef. After the Xinhai Revolution, Mr. N had come to America and opened a restaurant in Chinatown, renowned for its excellent cuisine. Uncle N, old Mrs. N's son, had inherited his father's legacy and was also a skilled cook. Zhang Zhuan had often eaten and drunk at old Mrs. N's restaurant as a child. You're in luck, Zhang Zhuan said with a smile as he supported Mrs. N towards the N family restaurant, turning to look at the bewildered Steve and Bucky. Zhuan, are they your friends? Mrs. N glanced back at Steve and Bucky, her brow furrowing slightly as she spoke with some concern. That tall one looks incredibly strong, but that skinny one is like a stick. He needs to eat more. I'll ask your Uncle N to make you a pot of ginseng chicken soup. It's very nourishing, thank you, Grandma N. Zhang Zhuan was deeply moved by what she said and didn't say anything to refuse. He knew that this was a kind gesture from Grandma N. Thank you on behalf of my friend. Grandma N gently patted the back of Zhang Zhuan's hand and said angrily, what are you thanking me for? We're neighbors, it's only natural. After that, Grandma N sighed again, it's a pity for your mother. Such a good girl, but she had such a strange disease. Strange disease. Zhang Zhuan frowned, a little surprised. The woman in his memory didn't seem to have any illness. Zhang Zhuan wanted to ask more, but Grandma N suddenly stopped. She looked up and saw that they had already arrived at the N family restaurant. Zhuan, take your friend inside to sit first. I'll go to the back to take a look. Without giving Zhang Zhuan a chance to speak, she walked through the courtyard with her crutches, passed through a small door, and disappeared into the backyard. Alex, what were you talking about with the old lady just now? Steve pulled Zhang Zhuan and asked curiously. I saw her glance at us. Zhang Zhuan temporarily put aside his doubts, pointed at Steve and said with a smile, Grandma N said you were too thin, so she wanted to stew a pot of ginseng chicken soup for you to nourish your body. Ginseng chicken soup. What is this? Can it really nourish your body? Before Steve could speak, Bucky couldn't wait to speak. If it's true, then bring Steve here to eat every day in the future. Steve is really too thin. Zhang Xuan couldn't help but curl his lips when he heard this, and thought to himself, they are indeed a pair of good friends. Chapter 5, Strange Disease. Angia Restaurant wasn't a star-rated hotel, just an ordinary restaurant. A large hall held a dozen or so round tables, large and small, each surrounded by a few chairs and stools. The surroundings were divided by open work screens, a classic Chinese style. Finding a table by the window, Zhang Xuan looked around and found that Angia Restaurant looked much the same as he remembered. Even the positions of the tables and chairs hadn't been moved. Alex, are you familiar with this place? Steve asked casually, ignoring Bucky, who was still pestering him, hoping he'd catch up. I lived here for 7 or 8 years as a kid. Zhang Xuan, whose memories of the place were pitifully limited, changed the subject. Chinese food takes a while to prepare, so we might have to wait a while. No worries, it's just a few blocks to Stark Industries. It won't be a big deal, Bucky said casually, taking in the surroundings with a look of curiosity. Xuan, come try some of Grandma's wine. It's been here for almost 20 years. As they were talking, old lady Anne sauntered over, leaning on a cane in one hand and carrying a dark brown, rustic clay vase in the other. A delighted smile graced her wrinkled face. Looking at the carved vase in Grandma Anne's hands, a new wave of images flooded Zhang Xuan's mind, and childhood memories flowed like water from a faucet. Is this Huadia wine? Zhang Xuan darted forward, helped Grandma Anne up, and took the bottle, excitedly exclaiming. Old Mrs. Anne sat beside Zhang Xuan with a smile on her face. She watched Zhang Xuan impatiently break the seal on the wine bottle and squinted her eyes and said, I still remember when you were 7 years old and not even as tall as the table. You sneaked into my wine cellar to steal wine and got so drunk that your mother had a hard time looking for you. After you got back, you beat you up. Old Mrs. Anne slowly told the stories that Alex had forgotten, carrying the dust of history, narrating the absurd yet beautiful life of Alex's childhood. The more Zhang Xuan listened, the more embarrassed he felt. He turned around to look at Steve and Bucky opposite him, and found that they were looking at him with confusion. He breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, they don't understand Chinese, otherwise it would be so embarrassing. More than 10 years have passed in the blink of an eye. Huru is gone, and you have grown up. Unknowingly, the dishes weren't already on the table. Old Mrs. Anne sighed, with the unique feelings of an old person. If your mother knew about this, she would be relieved. Eat quickly. With a sigh, old Mrs. Anne immediately regained her spirits, pointing to the table full of dishes and calling out, Xuan, tell your friends not to sit there, eat while it's hot. Zhang Xuan calmed down, looked at the two people opposite who were already drooling, grabbed the chopsticks on the table, smiled and said, are these chopsticks usable? If not, I'll change your knives and forks. Steve and Bucky exchanged a glance, shook their heads, and said resolutely, no. They then carefully observed Zhang Xuan's movements and reached for the chopsticks on the table. Their movements were comical, but fortunately, they were both able to hold their chopsticks steady, though picking up food was difficult. Zhang Xuan remained silent, filling the glasses with wine. Then, ignoring them, he poured a glass for himself and Grandma Anne, and quietly asked, Grandma Anne, you said my mother had a strange illness before, but how come I didn't know? Zhang Xuan couldn't contain his confusion and asked. He couldn't eat a meal without getting to the bottom of it. Grandma Anne paused, then remained silent for a moment before speaking. Wei Ru didn't tell you because she didn't want you to know. Grandma Anne, just tell me. I can't not even know how my mother died. In Alex's memory, his mother's death was sudden and without warning. Zhang Xuan hadn't known before, but after hearing about her strange illness, he immediately realized it was likely related. Wei Ru is such a pitiful person. First, she met a heartless man who left you and your mother without a trace, and then, to top it off, she's contracted such a strange illness. How unfair, old Mrs. Anne said, tapping her cane against a blue stone floor. How could such a good girl like Wei Ru have so many misfortunes? Hearing Grandma Anne's angry outburst, Zhang Xuan felt a pang of anger build up in his chest, eager to vent. Elsewhere, Steve and Bucky also stopped, looking at Zhang Xuan and old Mrs. Anne, who looked perturbed. They wanted to say something, but unfortunately, they had no idea what they were talking about and could only stare blankly. Grandma Anne, what's the disease? Is it incurable? While medical technology in 1940 wasn't as advanced as it is in the 21st century, many illnesses were no longer incurable. Few could be considered terminal illnesses. They say Huru is a monster, but I know it's an illness, an incurable disease. Old Mrs. N's eyes gradually became moist, and there was deep guilt in her turbid eyes. They want to drive Huru out. I tried to persuade them, but they all disagreed. What a sin. In this foreign country, without the care of the villagers, you and your mother must have suffered so much. Listening to Grandma N's irrelevant words, Zhang Zhuan was completely confused. Wasn't it an illness? How could it be a monster? Grandma N, what's going on? What disease does my mother have? Zhang Zhuan was a little anxious. I don't know what disease it is. Old Mrs. N shook her white-haired head, her old face full of horror. Her body and face are covered with the golden scales, just like fish scales. It looks scary. No one noticed at first, but then someone saw it and spread it to the whole neighborhood. Then they said Huru was the reincarnation of a demon, that she would bring disaster, and that she must be driven away. As she spoke, old Mrs. N raised her hand to wipe away the tears from her eyes. I tried to persuade them and stop them, but they just wouldn't agree. They insisted on driving you and your mother away. I really have no way? Fish scales. Zhang Zhuan was stunned when he heard this. He didn't believe in any demon talk, let alone think this was really a disease. This was the Marvel world, and he thought of a possibility. Seeing Grandma N sobbing uncontrollably, Zhang Zhuan came to his senses, gently patted her back, and whispered soothingly, Grandma N, my mother won't blame you. We haven't suffered much since leaving Chinatown. We're living well and happily. Don't blame yourself. Zhang Zhuan wasn't just trying to comfort Grandma N, she truly did it, and that's what Zhang Zhuan admired most about her. A woman, with a child, raised him single-handedly, supporting him through school and even saving up for an apartment. What a great and hard-working mother. After much consolation, Grandma N finally calmed down. With Uncle N's support, she slowly walked away, leaning on a cane. Watching Grandma N gradually recede, Zhang Zhuan thought to himself that his words would surely ease some of her guilt. Alex, what were you talking about just now? Why are you both crying? Steve asked curiously as Grandma N walked away. Nothing, just talking about her childhood. Old people get emotional easily, so they started crying. Zhang Zhuan made up an excuse to smooth things over. To avoid further questioning, he quickly told them to eat. Are you used to eating Chinese food? Steve and Bucky didn't take Zhang Zhuan's explanation too seriously. They nodded and said seriously, Chinese food is really delicious. If it's delicious, eat more. Zhang Zhuan laughed heartily, his chopsticks flying as he kept serving food to the two of them, but in his heart he was thinking about what Mrs. N had said. I wonder if I have the X gene too. Chapter 6 Marilyn Monroe. After leaving Chinatown, Zhang Zhuan, Steve, and Bucky wandered the streets for a while before heading towards the Stark Expo Industrial Park. The expo was almost about to begin. To others, the Stark Expo felt futuristic and sci-fi, but to Zhang Zhuan, every emerging technology seemed like an antique, completely uninteresting. Following the excited Steve and Bucky, Zhang Zhuan was preoccupied with a story he would tell Vivian Lee after meeting her. Zhang Zhuan had a good memory of many good movies, but few were suitable for this era. His most vivid memory was Roman Holiday, but Zhang Zhuan didn't want to share it. He wanted to save it for Audrey Hepburn, the angel who fell into the world. After ruling out Roman Holiday, Zhang Zhuan's film choices were limited. After much deliberation, he narrowed down his list of 3 movies, but he would wait to decide which one to choose until he met Vivian Lee. All 3 films are classics in Hollywood history. The first, Ghost, is a true tearjerker, a film whose brilliance wouldn't have been eclipsed even decades earlier. The second, The Shawshank Redemption, is an uncrowned Oscar winner. That title alone speaks volumes. The third, Cinema Paradiso, a pure dream about cinema, is an undeniable classic. Zhang Zhuan had actually planned a 4th film, La Belle Sicily, but the film's passionate scenes ultimately led him to abandon it. America at that time hadn't yet experienced the 1989 uprising, and few people could stomach the passionate scenes depicted in films. As he recalled the plots of the 3 films, Zhang Zhuan's pace unconsciously slowed. Squeezed by the surging crowd, he was separated from Steve and Bucky in front of him. By the time Zhang Zhuan regained consciousness, he could no longer find them. All he could see were a sea of colorful heads. Forget it, if I can't find them, then I can't find them. Zhang Zhuan didn't care. He found a corner and sat down, mentally organizing his thoughts. Zhang Zhuan had seen the movie, but recounting its plot in vivid detail was a bit of a challenge. He had no choice but to prepare in advance. Hi, hello. Just as Zhang Xuan was lost in thought, a clear female voice suddenly rang out beside him. He looked up in surprise, and upon seeing the girl before him, a flicker of astonishment flashed in his eyes. He replied, somewhat bewildered, hello. The girl looked only 13 or 14, but her face held no trace of youthfulness. She exuded an unprecedented maturity, possessing a captivating charm despite her youth. In both his past and present lives, Zhang Xuan had been a complete virgin. Aside from going out on business trips and staying indoors all day, his interactions with women were few and far between. He had met many beautiful women, including many lovely young women. But in Zhang Xuan's memory, few could compare to the girl before him. Hello, my name is Norma Jean Baker, the beautiful woman said, sitting down beside him with a familiar air. She raised her eyebrows and introduced herself with a smile. Hello, I'm Alex Zhang. Zhang Xuan stole a glance at the beautiful woman beside him. Seeing her smile, his heart moved, and he secretly sighed. What a beautiful smile. Everyone's out having fun. Why are you just sitting here, daydreaming? The little girl asked, crossing her legs and turning to look at Zhang Xuan in confusion. I'm tired, sitting down for a while. Zhang Xuan made up an excuse. I've been watching you for a long time. You've been sitting here almost since we entered the venue. The little girl didn't hesitate to expose Zhang Xuan's lie, leaning her little head close to his ear and whispering word by word. Why are you watching me? Zhang Xuan didn't want to explain anything to the little girl, so he changed the subject, turning around and looking around. Your family? Why are you the only one? The little girl's face suddenly darkened, and she said in a low voice, I'm an orphan. Tears welled up in her beautiful eyes, threatening to burst at any moment. Another orphan. Hearing the little girl's words, Zhang Xuan thought of himself, Steve, and Bucky. A key reason for their close relationship was their shared orphanage. Seeing the tearful little girl, Zhang Xuan couldn't help but feel a surge of sympathy. He gently put his arm around her shoulders and asked softly, Where are you living now? My adoptive father always beat me, so I ran away. The little girl trembled in Zhang Xuan's arms. Zhang Xuan was furious. His tragic past life had left him with a deep hatred for parents who beat their children, and he had repeatedly disciplined such parents. However, countless times, Zhang Xuan knew this approach wouldn't work. The parents he disciplined only became more aggressive, taking their anger out on their children. Then you'll follow me from now on. Zhang Xuan looked down at the glistening tears dripping from the corners of the little girl's eyes. Suddenly, a decision was made, and he said firmly, From now on, I'll be your big brother. The little girl poked her head out of Zhang Xuan's arms and looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Brother, the first time I saw you, I knew you were a good person, so he was being called a nice guy? Zhang Xuan was a bit amused. After holding the little girl in silence for a while, Zhang Xuan suddenly thought of a serious question. Looking down at the little girl, he asked seriously, Norma, what brought you here? I came to see Vivian Li. The little girl suddenly became excited at this. She struggled to escape Zhang Xuan's arms, stood in front of him with her head held high, and said proudly, I want to be a big star like Vivian Li. I even have a stage name in mind, Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe. Zhang Xuan frowned slightly, wondering, why does that name sound so familiar? Oh, right? Isn't that the name of the Hollywood sex symbol? Zhang Xuan stared in amazement at the proud little girl before him. She vaguely resembled a future Hollywood sex symbol. Vivian Li is here. Vivian Li is here. Suddenly, a shout echoed from afar. With that cry, the crowd scattered throughout the expo all rushed in one direction. The little girl, no, little Monroe, upon hearing the voice, immediately grabbed Zhang Xuan and ran inside with the crowd. Vivian Li is here? Zhang Xuan finally realized that he had come to the Stark Expo specifically for Vivian Li. In fact, it wasn't just Zhang Xuan and little Monroe rushing towards the expo's central stands, everyone else was rushing towards them. The surging crowd instantly surrounded the 10-meter square stand. And yet, Zhang Xuan and little Monroe were still 10 meters away. A height of 1.7 meters is considered impressive for a Chinese person, but compared to an American raised on beef, that height is nothing. Steve Rogers is a surprise. All they can see is the back of his head and a hat. What should I do? I can't squeeze in. Little Monroe, still not fully grown, barely reached Zhang Xuan's chest. She couldn't see anything, even if she jumped. She was so anxious she was on the verge of tears. Brother, pick me up. I want to see Vivian Li. Little Monroe turned and saw Zhang Xuan beside her. Her eyes lit up as if she had seen hope. Zhang Xuan leaned down, leaned close to Little Monroe's ear, and whispered, "Little Monroe, do you want to see Vivian Lee up close?" Little Monroe looked at Zhang Xuan in confusion, then nodded after a moment. "Yes, okay, then, no matter what happens, Little Monroe, don't be surprised or scream, okay?" Little Monroe was even more puzzled, but she finally nodded with a firm expression. "Little Monroe, let's go," Zhang Xuan whispered, and teleportation instantly activated. Zhang Xuan and Little Monroe and his arms vanished, reappearing at the front of the crowd, just a stone's throw from the central stand. The sudden appearance of the two went unnoticed by anyone around them. Their attention was completely absorbed by Vivian Lee in the stands, so they hadn't noticed the sudden appearance of two people. Little Monroe nestled in Zhang Xuan's arms, her face filled with horror. She opened her mouth to scream, but then remembered Zhang Xuan's instructions and immediately covered her mouth with her hands. She blinked at Zhang Xuan, as if asking, "Brother, is this magic? It's a secret." Zhang Xuan smiled faintly, turning his gaze to the stage where the Hollywood icon stood. "P.S. I just noticed the text is getting jammed together again. When will Kitty fix this problem?" Chapter 7, Ghost. Last year's Gone with the Wind not only catapulted Vivian Lee, a newcomer to Hollywood, to stardom and even earned her an Oscar. This year's Waterloo Bridge further propelled her to the pinnacle of fame, making her one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses. Vivian Lee's appearance at the Stark Expo instantly electrified the venue. Hearing the constant screams, especially from the young Marilyn Monroe in her arms, Zhang Xuan couldn't help but sigh in emotion, reflecting on the frenzy of fandom, regardless of era. Lee's brief appearance on stage, before quickly disappearing, left the audience furious. They vented their frustrations on Howard Stark, who appeared right after Lee. Despite his rhetoric, no one was impressed, and they shouted for him to get out. Watching Howard Stark's embarrassed expression on stage, Zhang Xuan couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for the future Iron Man's father. In fact, Zhang Xuan was very interested in what Howard was talking about. He realized there might be another way to make money besides Hollywood. "Let's talk to him after we meet Vivian Lee." Zhang Xuan looked at Howard, who was standing awkwardly on the stage. After some thought, he decided to go find Vivian Lee first. "Come on, Little Monroe, let's go find the big star Vivian Lee." Of all the stars of that era, Zhang Xuan only had a crush on Audrey Hepburn and no one else, so he spoke more casually. When Little Monroe heard Zhang Xuan's words, she knew her brother was about to perform another magic trick. She was so excited that she hadn't even been so excited to meet Vivian Lee. Zhang Xuan didn't know where Vivian Lee was, so he had to search one place at a time. Fortunately, the backstage was small, and Zhang Xuan quickly found Vivian Lee's room. Putting Little Monroe down in his arms and adjusting his clothes, Zhang Xuan walked to the door and knocked gently. "Who's there?" A voice like a clear spring rippled from the room. "Hello, Miss Vivian Lee. My name is Alex Zhang. I need your help." Zhang Xuan had already made up his mind when he knocked on the door. He had eliminated the other two of the three films, leaving only one. After Zhang Xuan finished speaking, the room fell silent for a moment. Then the door opened and Vivian Lee poked her head out, looking Zhang Xuan up and down. She asked, somewhat puzzled, "What can I do for you?" "Here's the thing. I have a story. I hope Miss Vivian Lee would be so kind as to listen to it." Zhang Xuan smiled, what he thought was a gentle smile. Vivian Lee hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, "Come in." "Thank you, Miss Vivian Lee, for trusting me." Zhang Xuan hadn't expected it to be so easy, and it made him feel a little uncomfortable. "You don't look like a bad person," Vivian Lee said, ushering Zhang Xuan into the room. Upon hearing Zhang Xuan's words, she turned and smiled. Was this a disguised way of playing the nice guy card? Zhang Xuan was too exhausted to complain. "Okay, I'd better tell a story." Zhang Xuan sighed and began to tell the story. "Ms. Vivian Lee, I hope you like this story." Sam and his fiancée Mary moved into a beautiful apartment that was exchanged for with the help of his friend Carl. The young bank clerk Sam and his fiancée Mary were deeply in love and were preparing for their wedding. One night when they returned from a play, they were robbed by gangsters. Sam was shot and killed in the fight. And Mary was heartbroken. Sam turned into a ghost, and he soon discovered that his friend Carl was the mastermind behind his death. In order to steal the huge sum of money in the bank, he wanted to obtain the secret code that Sam knew, and he began to pursue Mary. Sam gradually learned how to use his power. He often wandered around Mary, protecting her at all times, but he could not communicate. In order to stop Carl, he found a psychic, Oda, who could communicate with ghosts, and got in touch with Mary through her. At first, Millie didn't believe it, but the facts finally made her feel Sam's existence. However, the two people who loved each other deeply could not contact and communicate directly. In order to protect Millie and punish the murderer, Sam retaliated against Carl. He took out a huge sum of money stolen by Carl, and made several of Carl's men suffer retribution. The frustrated Carl wanted to hurt Millie, but fortunately Oda and Sam arrived in time. Facing the ghost full of hatred, Carl finally destroyed himself. Sam, who fulfilled his wish and welcomed the angel, is about to go to heaven. Before disappearing, Millie finally saw Sam, who showed up, and the two hugged each other tightly. In the end, Sam returned to the arms of God with a heart full of reluctance and love for Millie. Brother, let Sam stay, okay? Little Monroe grabbed Zhang Xuan's arm, her eyes slightly red, and said with a choked voice. Zhang Xuan reached out and wiped the tears from little Monroe's eyes. He chuckled softly and said gently, Monroe, this is just a story, that requires Sam to stay, little Monroe insisted, her voice tearful. Mr. Alex, this is a deeply moving story. I love it. Thank you. Vivian Lee gently wiped away her tears with her index finger and took a deep breath, calming the throbbing in her heart. Miss Vivian Lee, what do you think about adapting this story for the big screen? Seeing Vivian Lee's expression, Zhang Xuan knew his mission was already halfway accomplished, and asked confidently. Do you want to make it into a movie? Vivian Lee suddenly understood. Why not? Isn't undying love something everyone desires? How do you want to do it? Vivian Lee loved this story and knew it would be a great film. She couldn't help but want to play the role of Marilyn in it. I'll sell you the story, and the rest is up to you. It wasn't that Zhang Xuan was being generous and didn't want to film it himself, it was simply that he didn't have the skills. Furthermore, he didn't know much about Hollywood, and a rash plunge into it would likely lead to a bloody disaster. It would be easier to sell the story. No, I won't sell it to him. Vivian Lee pondered for a moment, then shook her head and refused. Why? Zhang Xuan was puzzled. He hadn't even made an offer, and Vivian Lee had already rejected it outright. That was unconventional. Was she trying to bargain? But from Vivian Lee's expression, it seemed she really didn't want to buy it. Selling it to me would be a waste. I can introduce you to someone who'll give you a good price. Vivian Lee smiled and named someone, Victor Fleming. Who's that? Zhang Xuan didn't know many people at that time, so he asked instinctively. The director of Gone with the Wind, a great poet. He would love this story and pay the price for it. Vivian Lee didn't seem offended by Zhang Xuan's words. After all, how many people actually care about the director of a movie? Okay. Then I'll trouble Miss Vivian Lee. Zhang Xuan didn't expect that selling a story would be so troublesome. He thought of Howard Stark outside. Maybe it would be more convenient to find him. By the way, Mr. Alex, do you know if this story has a name? Ghost and the Human. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Investing in Stark. After bidding farewell to Vivian Lee, Zhang Xuan teleported back to the venue, holding the still excited little Monroe. In the center of the stands, Stark was speaking enthusiastically, and the previously disgruntled audience below had quieted down, listening intently. Howard Stark has some talent. Zhang Xuan glanced at him, the thought resurfacing in his mind. Maybe I should give it a try. With that thought, Zhang Xuan vanished from his spot once again. Looking around at the familiar surroundings, little Monroe, nestled in Zhang Xuan's arms, looked up, puzzled, and asked, Brother, why are we back again? The two reappeared in the very backstage area they had left just minutes prior. The backstage area was in chaos, with the strippers preparing to go on stage rushing past Zhang Xuan, unnoticed by his sudden appearance. Little Monroe, I need to talk to someone, Zhang Xuan explained with a smile, his eyes scanning the area until he quickly found his target. Howard Hughes, dressed in a light blue suit, had just emerged from behind a curtain, a smug smile on his face, occasionally giving instructions to a middle-aged man beside him. Hello, Mr. Stark. Zhang Xuan saw Howard Stark and hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. Hello, may I ask who you are? Howard Stark looked up at Zhang Xuan, a hint of confusion on his face. However, Howard Stark's attention was quickly drawn to the little Monroe in Zhang Xuan's arms, and he fixed his eyes on her. "It's really hereditary," Zhang Xuan saw Howard Stark's eyes and complained in his heart. He quietly moved his body and blocked little Monroe to his side, then said, "Hello, Mr. Stark, I'm Alex Zhang. There are some things I hope to talk to you about in private." Howard Stark looked at Zhang Xuan in surprise. Seeing Zhang Xuan's calm face, Howard Stark, who was about to refuse, suddenly had an idea. He raised his wrist to check the time and replied, "Okay, but I'll only give you 5 minutes." In Howard Stark's office, Howard Stark grabbed Zhang Xuan's shoulders and shouted excitedly, "Alex, are you serious?" Zhang Xuan shrugged and said casually, "There's no need for me to lie to you, Mr. Stark." Howard Stark stared at Zhang Xuan for a long time, as if thinking about something. After a moment, Howard suddenly sat down and said lazily, "Tell me, what do you want?" Stark Industries shares. Zhang Xuan sought out Howard Stark, his focus being on the future of Stark Industries. Upon hearing this, Howard Stark abruptly stood up, about to refuse. But before he could, Zhang Xuan spoke first. "Mr. Stark, I have many more technologies, the same as the one I just showed you." Zhang Xuan sat leisurely on the sofa, teasing the little Monroe beside him as he spoke calmly. "I'll use them as a stake. I don't want much, just 30%, but it must be original shares." Howard Stark's expression turned cold, and he snorted, slowly sitting back on the sofa. "Alex, that's not how you do business." Zhang Xuan shrugged, glancing at Howard Stark and casually throwing out a few words: magnetic levitation, nuclear fission, supersonic aircraft, controlled nuclear fusion. Howard Stark stood up again, looking at Zhang Xuan in disbelief. "Mr. Stark, are these technologies worth 30% of Stark Industries shares?" Zhang Xuan knew Howard Stark had taken the bait, and a smug smile curled his lips. In his previous life, Zhang Xuan was not only a teleporter but also a hacker. The technologies he described were all secrets he had stolen from his past life. Although he couldn't understand many of them, he had memorized them all. Thanks to his powerful telepathic powers, Zhang Xuan had an exceptionally strong memory, capable of a photographic memory. "Of course," Howard Stark exclaimed excitedly. Although he had only heard the names, he believed these technologies would definitely propel Stark Industries to new heights. As a businessman, profit was paramount. "Then, Mr. Stark, when do we sign the contract?" "Sign now, sign now." Howard Stark, fearing any delay, immediately called his lawyer to draft the contract. The two signed the contract that evening, and Zhang Xuan shared all the cutting-edge technologies he had in his mind. In return, Zhang Xuan received 30% of the original shares in Stark Industries. "Brother, so many great things in exchange for a 30% stake, isn't that too much?" Little Monroe, though only 14, was no less experienced. Just from hearing Zhang Xuan describe the technologies, she knew they were incredibly valuable. A 30% stake in Stark Industries seemed a bit of a bargain. "Little Monroe, you'll know later." Zhang Xuan certainly knew the value of the technology he'd contributed, but he also knew it would be a waste to keep it in his head. He didn't have the ability to create it himself. Besides, Stark Industries would one day be the world's largest corporation, so a 30% stake was a lot. "Hey, Alex, where have you been? We've been looking for you for 2 hours." Bucky's disgruntled voice echoed from behind him, followed by Steve's voice. "Alex, everything's okay, isn't it?" Hearing their voices brought Zhang Xuan back to his senses, awestruck. He'd forgotten about his two good friends. "Nothing, just wandering around, meeting Vivian Lee and investing in Stark." These two things were so bizarre, no one would believe them if he told them. Zhang Xuan thought for a moment and decided not to say anything. Steve and Bucky were also worried about Zhang Xuan, and relieved to see he was alright. It was then that they noticed the little Monroe in Zhang Xuan's hand. Steve was momentarily startled at the sight of the little Monroe, then he snapped back to his senses. He looked up at Zhang Xuan with a look of surprise, as if asking, "Who is this?" Bucky, however, smirked at Zhang Xuan and said sarcastically, "Alex, I didn't expect you to be so impressive. It's only been a short time. And she's just a little girl. Aren't you afraid?" "What nonsense." Zhang Xuan knew what he was thinking the moment he saw Bucky's smirk. He patted Bucky's shoulder firmly and said sternly, "This is Marilyn Monroe. She's an orphan. From now on, I'll be her brother." "Orphan?" Steve and Bucky exchanged glances, a flicker of tenderness in their eyes as they watched the delighted Marilyn Monroe. "She's your sister, and that means she's our sister, too. We'll all take care of her." Little Monroe was a sharp soul. Upon hearing what they were saying, she immediately stepped forward, smiled sweetly, and called out, "Hello, brothers." Steve and Bucky couldn't help but laugh at the words brothers, feeling incredibly happy. The four of them walked along the Brooklyn Bridge. On the early summer evening, a cool breeze blew off the river, making them feel refreshed. However, two of them felt a bit heavy-hearted. Bucky deliberately fell behind, grabbed Steve, and whispered, "Steve, how much money do you have on you?" "I paid Alex's medical bills last time, so I don't have much left." Steve glanced at Alex and Little Monroe, who were laughing and chatting happily in front of him, nodded, and said with a smile, "But I can paint. I think I can make some money. I can work in a factory." Bucky nodded. "Since Monroe is our sister, we can't let her suffer a little. We need to make more money and dress her up beautifully." "Yes, she's our sister. We must give her a good life," Steve said with a firm face, clenching his fists. Zhang Xuan and Little Monroe, walking in front, were unaware of the conversation between the two behind them. If Zhang Xuan knew, he would probably be in a state of confusion. With a 30% stake in Stark Industries, why would Zhang Xuan worry about running out of money? Not to mention Ghost. Chapter 9 Guarantee. The next morning, Zhang Xuan arrived at the police station at the urging of Steve and Bucky. He wanted to adopt Little Monroe, but he couldn't do so without the necessary documentation. "Sorry, you don't meet the adoption requirements," the middle-aged policewoman said, leaving Zhang Xuan stunned. He'd assumed he was just going to the police station to get his certificate, but that was the answer. "Why? Is it because I'm Asian?" Zhang Xuan questioned the middle-aged policewoman's indifferent expression, his anger building. The middle-aged policewoman was slightly stunned when she heard this, and quickly explained, "I'm sorry, sir, I think you misunderstood. Because your age does not meet the adoption regulations, you are not eligible to adopt." Zhang Xuan looked embarrassed, touched his head and apologized. "I'm sorry, I misunderstood you." Then, Zhang Xuan pointed at Little Monroe beside him and asked anxiously, "But Little Monroe's current adoptive parents are not good to her. She just ran away from home. What will happen to her if I don't adopt her?" The middle-aged policewoman saw the sad face of Little Monroe, her heart softened, reached out and touched Little Monroe's face, and said gently, "Her adoptive parents will be severely punished by law, and we will find a good family for her." Steve and Bucky behind him heard about this for the first time. They were furious when they heard this, and they wanted to find Little Monroe's adoptive parents and teach them a lesson. Hearing the middle-aged policewoman's words again, he flatly refused. "No, we don't trust anyone else. Isn't there another way? What if we want to adopt her?" Zhang Xuan knew there were good people in the world, but like Steve and Bucky, he didn't feel comfortable leaving Little Monroe with anyone else. The middle-aged policewoman shook her head, apologetic. "You guys go back first. I'll find someone." Leaving that message, Zhang Xuan sprinted out of the police station, found a deserted alley, and teleported himself to disappear instantly. A few minutes later, Zhang Xuan arrived at Stark Industries and went straight to Howard Stark. As an arms supplier to the U.S. military, Howard Stark held a very special position in the United States. Finding him should be able to solve this problem. Zhang Xuan found Howard Stark in a hidden underground laboratory, studying the pile of data Zhang Xuan had contributed yesterday. "Hey, Alex, why are you here?" Howard rushed out to greet Zhang Xuan, his face brimming with excitement. Zhang Xuan didn't beat around the bush and told him his story, but to Zhang Xuan's surprise, Howard didn't agree right away. "Howard, what's wrong, Alex? Child protection in the United States is very strict, so I can't help you with this." Howard looked at Zhang Xuan with guilt. "If I do this, I will probably be criticized by the media." And then, Zhang Xuan was a little disappointed. He didn't expect that even Howard couldn't help with this matter. "Although I can't help directly, I can be your guarantor." Seeing Zhang Xuan's disappointed face, Howard pondered for a moment and said, "If you can find 2 other guarantors, and the 3 of them guarantee you, there will be no problem in adopting Little Monroe." "Guarantor?" Zhang Xuan was a little surprised, but he was happy in his heart and said quickly, "Can my friend do it?" "Of course not." Howard glanced at Zhang Xuan and continued, "The guarantor must be a person with a great reputation and fame in the United States." Zhang Xuan was slightly stunned, and suddenly thought of someone in his mind. "Can Vivian Lee?" "Of course," Howard replied, and then looked at Zhang Xuan in surprise. "Do you know Vivian Lee?" Although he invited Vivian Lee to participate in the Stark Expo, the relationship between the two was not deep. Vivian Lee didn't even look at him. "We just met last night," Zhang Xuan casually replied, then immediately asked, "Mr. Stark, can you help me contact Miss Vivian Lee? Miss Vivian Lee hasn't left New York yet. I can help you find her." Howard was slightly stunned, then nodded in agreement. He was curious about Zhang Xuan and Vivian Lee's relationship. They just met last night, and today he wanted Vivian Lee to be his guarantor. Isn't this a bit ridiculous? "Miss Vivian Lee, we meet again." Zhang Xuan soon saw Vivian Lee in a hotel. "Mr. Alex, I was just looking for you too." Seeing Zhang Xuan, Vivian Lee's face was also excited. "I told Victor your story last night. He can't wait to meet you. He's on a plane to New York now." "Huh? Actually, there's no need to rush. Victor can't wait to bring your story to the big screen." Vivian Lee looked at Zhang Xuan's stunned expression and chuckled softly. "Actually, Miss Vivian Lee, I came to you hoping you could do me a favor." Zhang Xuan gave an awkward smile, then remembered his business. He quickly opened his mouth to tell her about Little Monroe and brought up Howard's suggestion. "I can be your guarantor, but, whatever it is, Miss Vivian Lee, just tell me, I'll definitely agree." Zhang Xuan saw Vivian Lee hesitate and said, patting his chest, "I want to be Monroe's guardian." Vivian Lee looked at Zhang Xuan and chuckled a few times. Seeing Zhang Xuan's strange expression, she explained, "I liked Monroe very much when I saw her last night. You won't object to me being her guardian, right?" "Of course not." Zhang Xuan knew very well that he would soon be joining the army with Steve, and he was worried about leaving Monroe alone in the United States. Vivian Lee being her guardian was exactly what he wanted, so how could he possibly object? "It's just that we need 3 guarantors. With you and Howard, there are only 2, so we're still 1 short." "Alex, you forgot. Victor will be in New York soon. I'm sure he'll be happy to vouch for you." That afternoon, Zhang Xuan saw the dusty Victor Fleming. After a brief conversation, Victor immediately agreed. The next day, Zhang Xuan brought Little Monroe, Steve, and Bucky to the police station again. "Alex, do you have a plan?" Steve's thin face was pale with a sickly look. His health had been poor to begin with, and after days of painting all night, his body was beginning to fail. Zhang Xuan noticed Steve's expression and asked with concern, "Steve, are you okay? Don't worry about Little Monroe. We can take care of it today." "I'm fine." Steve waved Zhang Xuan's outstretched hand away, looking at Little Monroe beside him with a smile on his face. "What happened?" Bucky suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. Everyone looked where his finger pointed. The police station entrance was packed with reporters, a bustling scene. Seeing this scene, Zhang Xuan suddenly remembered that he seemed to have forgotten to tell them to conceal their identities yesterday. As Zhang Xuan had expected, as they approached, they heard someone in the distance shouting at the top of their lungs, "Vivian, I love you." "Howard Stark, I'm going to marry you." "Vivian? Howard Stark? What are they doing here?" Steve frowned slightly, not as excited as Bucky, but rather a bit surprised. Zhang Xuan knew what they were doing, but he couldn't say it right now. He could only drag the 3 of them through the crowd and into the police station. "Hi, Alex, you're finally here." Howard, upon seeing Zhang Xuan, immediately abandoned the reporters and walked over. As soon as Howard left, Vivian followed. Victor, however, was already waiting inside the station. As for the reporters who wanted to follow, they were all turned away by the police. Seeing Howard, who stood out so clearly wherever he went, Zhang Xuan complained, "Don't you guys know how to disguise yourself? We didn't expect to attract so much attention." Vivian Lee said, her face flushing slightly. She felt a bit embarrassed by the commotion. "Forget it, let's just go and get the paperwork done." It had already happened, and Zhang Xuan was helpless. Luckily, no one had noticed them when they first entered. Steve and Bucky stood there, stunned. They hadn't expected their acquaintance to actually know Howard Stark and Vivian Lee, and seemingly have a good relationship. "I'll explain it all when we get back." Seeing Steve and Bucky's expressions, Zhang Xuan understood what they were thinking. He gently patted their shoulders and whispered, "Now we need to get Little Monroe's case done." With Howard Stark and Vivian Lee as guarantors, Victor was just a filler. The paperwork was quickly completed. Little Monroe became Zhang Xuan's sister, and Vivian Lee became Monroe's guardian. Victor also joined in the fun by becoming Monroe's godfather. Howard also tried to intervene, but was stopped by Zhang Xuan. "You're a playboy. You mustn't go near Little Monroe." Zhang Xuan's reasoning was sharp. Hearing this, Howard could only secretly wipe away tears. P.S. Adoption guarantees don't exist in the United States. They were fabricated by Scorpio for the plot's sake, so don't worry about it. Chapter 10 Going to Europe. After resolving the adoption issue for little Monroe, Zhang Xuan, in high spirits, naturally wanted to treat everyone to a meal. After a brief thought, Zhang Xuan and his group headed towards Chinatown. Neither Zhang Xuan nor Alex were fond of Western food, preferring Chinese cuisine. Steve and Bucky deliberately lagged behind, pulling Zhang Xuan back. Before they could speak, Zhang Xuan spoke first. I know what you're going to ask. Let me tell you. Zhang Xuan thought about it and concealed some things, such as the 30% stake in Stark Industries. He didn't disclose it, simply saying that he had mentioned an idea to Howard that caught his attention. That was all. However, Zhang Xuan didn't hide anything about Vivian Li. On the one hand, there was no need to hide it, and on the other, there would be many more such stories in the future. He couldn't keep it a secret forever, could he? After listening to Zhang Xuan's story, Steve and Bucky looked at him with strange expressions, their eyes filled with suspicion and envy. Steve, Bucky, I think you both have good looks and potential. Why don't you come with me to Hollywood and become big stars? Zhang Xuan, knowing the personalities, said this purely to lighten the mood. As expected, the moment Zhang Xuan uttered this, they both immediately refused. Actually, being a cartoonist is my dream. This was Steve's wish. In fact, he was quite skilled in drawing. I don't have any big dreams. I just want to find a woman and live a good life. It's hard to imagine that this would be the initial dream of the Winter Soldier, who would later intimidate so many. Listening to the two slightly sentimental words, Zhang Xuan suddenly hesitated. Should he change history? Back at Angela Restaurant, a table of authentic and delicious Chinese cuisine, so colorful and fragrant, it made everyone's mouth water. Even Vivian Li, despite her beauty, threw aside her reserved demeanor and enthusiastically joined in the feast. After the delicious meal, everyone rubbed their bellies and sighed in admiration. I didn't expect Chinese food to be so delicious. Howard, still clutching a fork, glanced at the few remaining ribs on the plate, then patted his bloated stomach. After a moment's hesitation, he finally put down his fork. Vivian Li, the most elegant of the group, wiped the grease from her mouth with a napkin, her pretty face a beam of satisfaction. Thank you, Alex. Chinese food is truly delicious. I'll definitely try it again someday. Little Monroe leaned back in her chair, her belly bulging. She'd eaten so much she was speechless. Her eyes kept darting at the table, as if she wanted to stuff herself with more. Zhang Xuan, standing nearby, frightened her and quickly stopped her. No matter how delicious the food is, you can't eat like that. If you die, it'll be a world's loss. Victor, the only one who had some grace, had a hint of unsatisfied satisfaction on his face. From the start, his mind hadn't been on the food, it was completely focused on the movie. By the time they realized what a delicious meal it was, only half of the dish was left on the table. In the end, they'd eaten the least, and felt the most regretful. We must have more. Seeing that everyone had almost finished, Zhang Xuan finally found his chance to speak. He'd tried to speak several times, but seeing everyone's attention focused on the food, he gave up. Miss Vivian Li, could you please take care of little Monroe for me for a while? After deliberating for a moment, Zhang Xuan looked at Vivian Li and asked pleadingly. What's wrong? What happened? Zhang Xuan had just adopted little Monroe, and how could he give her away so suddenly? Vivian Li was a little surprised, and she looked at him with confusion. Little Monroe, on the other hand, was overwhelmed by Zhang Xuan's words and hugged him, tears streaming down her face. I'm just going to Europe for a few days, and I'll be back soon. Going to Europe was something Zhang Xuan had planned long ago. In fact, he had been planning a trip to Europe ever since he learned he'd arrived in 1940. Going to Europe? There's a war going on there right now. What are you going there for? Howard, an arms dealer with extensive knowledge of World War II, frowned at Zhang Xuan's words and asked in confusion. Zhang Xuan couldn't bring himself to reveal his true purpose. After much deliberation, he could only come up with an excuse, saying in a low voice, I found some clues about my father, and I want to go to Europe to see him. Father, Vivian Li and Howard didn't know Zhang Xuan's background, so they were a little surprised. My father disappeared before I was even born, and I've been trying to find him, Zhang Xuan explained briefly. Now that I have a clue, I must go to Europe and find him. With Zhang Xuan's words, no one had any excuse to stop him. Only little Monroe continued to cry, "Brother, I won't let you go. If you go, take Monroe with you." Zhang Xuan hadn't expected Monroe to rely on him so much. While feeling proud, he felt a headache. It was really inconvenient to take a child with him on this trip to Europe. With World War II raging in Europe, Zhang Xuan didn't dare take the risk of taking a child with him. Just as his headache was about to begin, Vivian Lee spoke up. Gently patting little Monroe's back, she whispered, "Little Monroe, brother's on his way to do some serious work. Let's not get in his way, okay?" Seeing the little girl trying to stop crying, Vivian Lee quickly soothed her, "Don't you want to be a star? Follow me, and I'll teach you, okay?" Little Monroe immediately stopped crying and emerged from Zhang Xuan's arms. She looked up at Vivian Lee, then back at Zhang Xuan, her bright eyes filled with a conflicted expression. "Little Monroe, brother hopes to see a different Monroe when I come back. What do you think?" Seeing the look in little Monroe's eyes, Zhang Xuan knew it was time to speak up. Little Monroe suddenly looked up at Zhang Xuan, nodded solemnly, and said, "Brother, little Monroe will be different. Waiting for you to come back, okay, we'll keep our word." After coaxing and cajoling little Monroe into a peaceful state, Zhang Xuan's trip to Europe was essentially settled. After dinner, Victor couldn't wait to grab Zhang Xuan. He knew Zhang Xuan was leaving the US for Europe, and he needed to hurry and finalize the film Ghost with him. "Victor, you're on your own." Zhang Xuan was a lazy man. His talk of Hollywood was really just about selling the story. He didn't want to worry about anything else. "The story's already been given to you. You're in charge of how to film it. You really don't need to ask me. You're the screenwriter, and you know the whole story best. You have an unwavering responsibility." Victor refused to let Zhang Xuan go, grabbing him and demanding his advice. "Okay, Victor. What do you want me to say?" Endlessly pestered, Zhang Xuan yielded. "Who do you think would be good leads?" The female lead is naturally Vivian Lee. As for Sam and Carl, I'm not familiar with any Hollywood actors, so I'll leave that to you, the director. Without waiting for Victor to recover, Zhang Xuan bolted, his demeanor nearly as fugitive-like as a prison escapee. When Zhang Xuan finally returned to the apartment, he found Steve and Bucky standing outside, looking as if they had something to say. Unsure of what was going on, Zhang Xuan invited them in. They hesitated, then, somewhat perplexed, said, "Gentlemen, just say whatever you want to say. No need to beat around the bush." "Alex, what exactly are you doing in Europe? P.S. Thanks to the tip from Moor's Delicious, Moor's Delicious. Scorpio is deeply grateful." Chapter 11 Netherlands. In the end, Zhang Xuan remained silent. After leaving some money for Steve and Bucky, he left his Brooklyn apartment and headed for Stark Industries in Manhattan. "Alex, Europe is in chaos right now. It's too dangerous for you to go now." Howard, standing in front of an old plane, couldn't help but persuade Zhang Xuan once again. Zhang Xuan shook his head and said firmly, "That's why I have to get to Europe quickly. I'm afraid if I'm late, I'll have no clues left." Zhang Xuan continued to use the same excuse he had used to deceive everyone. Howard looked at Zhang Xuan deeply, sighed, and offered sincere blessings. "Alex, I hope your wish comes true and you return safely and swiftly. Don't worry, I won't give up my 30% stake in Stark Industries," Zhang Xuan said jokingly and stepped onto the plane. The planes of this era were far from the advanced 21st century ones and were quite primitive. Honestly, Zhang Xuan didn't dare to board such a plane. Even teleporting would be safer than this. But if Zhang Xuan did this, there would be no explanation. After boarding the plane and finding a window seat, Zhang Xuan closed his eyes and dozed off, his mind racing as he pondered his European itinerary. He had a single purpose, to find someone. Not his father, whom he had no memory of, but a girl, a woman destined to become a global sensation. The thought of this woman made Zhang Xuan's entire body tremble with excitement. She was his goddess, and even in the 21st century, where beauties abound, no one could replace her place in Zhang Xuan's heart. She was none other than Audrey Hepburn, known as the Fallen Angel. But it was 1940, and the future angel was only 11 years old, enduring untold suffering in the Netherlands, which had been invaded by the Nazis. Many of her family members had been brutally murdered, and she was forced to live in poverty with her mother, sometimes even relying on tulip bulbs to survive. Thinking of the future angel's suffering, Zhang Xuan longed to be by her side immediately, to rescue her from her suffering. This was the main reason he chose the plane over the ship. He wanted to end the angel's suffering as soon as possible. After more than 10 hours of arduous flight, the antiquated plane, which Zhang Xuan considered extremely unsafe, finally landed safely at an airport outside London, England. This was a Royal Air Force airfield, and everywhere one looked was filled with rows of fighter jets and British soldiers in military uniforms coming and going. In a hurry to rescue the angel, Zhang Xuan had skipped a commercial flight and instead went directly to Howard, which allowed him to reach England so quickly and safely. After stepping off the plane, Zhang Xuan glanced at the rows of ancient fighter jets at the airport, curled his lips slightly, and then, led by an officer, cautiously left the area. London was still damp in June, and the low clouds seemed to threaten rain at any moment. He had no interest in observing the melancholy of the foggy city and headed straight for the train station. Unlike the 21st century, the UK and continental Europe are still separated by a chasm, the English Channel. To reach the European continent from the UK, the only way to fly is by boat. Zhang Xuan didn't dare fly, as he didn't know if he would encounter the Luftwaffe. Zhang Xuan had no other choice but to take the boat. Fortunately, it didn't take long, delaying him for more than a day. After a day, Zhang Xuan finally crossed the English Channel and arrived on the war-torn European continent, Calais, France. Compared to the humid heat of London, the French sun was far brighter. After nearly 2 days of suffocation, Zhang Xuan finally breathed in the fresh air. Originally, Zhang Xuan had planned to rest in France for a few days, but the continuous travel had taken its toll. In both his past and present lives, Zhang Xuan's physique was not considered strong. He was only 1.8 meters tall, but in reality, he was only slightly stronger than Steve. However, when Zhang Xuan overheard the latest war developments, his desire to rest was gone. The German army was launching a fierce assault on France's northern defenses, and it seemed they would soon reach Paris. Reflecting on the news he had heard in England about the Anglo-French evacuation of Dunkirk, Zhang Xuan realized that France was on the verge of defeat. Time was running out. With this in mind, Zhang Xuan could only rush to the Netherlands without delay. Since the Netherlands had already fallen, Zhang Xuan naturally couldn't reach it by train or ship. However, this wasn't a problem for him. In the chaotic Europe, he could use teleportation with impunity. His only concern was navigating the German lines. Fortunately, Zhang Xuan had over 20 years of experience from his previous life, making concealing his tracks easy. After wasting almost an entire night, Zhang Xuan finally arrived in Arnhem, the Netherlands, where Audrey Hepburn currently resided. She was studying ballet at the Arnhem Conservatory of Music, her original dream of becoming a ballerina. Arnhem wasn't as dilapidated as Zhang Xuan had expected. If it weren't for the numerous German soldiers walking the streets, Zhang Xuan would have been incredulous that this was a recently occupied city. Zhang Xuan had no idea where the angel lived, but that didn't bother him. After some searching, he found the Arnhem Conservatory of Music, which had also been unaffected by the war. Inside, there were many beautiful girls in uniform, all students of the conservatory. Transmitting silently into the academy, Zhang Xuan searched relentlessly for the angel. His efforts paid off. In a dance studio, Zhang Xuan spotted a tall figure. Though still underdeveloped and her beautiful face still undeveloped, her every smile, every gesture, every expression told him that this was the angel he'd been looking for, Audrey Hepburn. Zhang Xuan was eager to approach and greet the goddess of his dreams, but he knew that a rash approach would only frighten her. Zhang Xuan suppressed his excitement and quietly watched the angel's graceful dance. As he watched, Zhang Xuan began to ponder, how could he approach the angel? Once he did, how could he gain her trust and persuade her to follow him out of this troubled Europe? But as he watched, Zhang Xuan's mind froze, all his questions forgotten. Only the graceful figure in the dance studio remained, like a pure white swan. When Zhang Xuan was completely immersed in Audrey Hepburn's graceful dance, he didn't know that his unscrupulous use of teleportation had already attracted the attention of some special departments of the. Some hidden people also showed great interest in him and were trying their best to track down his whereabouts. Chapter 12 Successful Abduction. Zhang Xuan waited until Audrey Hepburn finished her dance practice before quietly leaving the Arnhem Conservatory of Music. He followed Audrey Hepburn to her home, a modest old wooden house in the suburbs. A woman dressed in servant's clothes was washing clothes in front of the door. Beside her were several wooden barrels filled with clothes. The woman had an old face, with a faint resemblance to Audrey's. She must be her mother. Audrey Hepburn took a quick step, sprinting like a fawn to the old woman's side. She gathered up her skirt and knelt beside her, saying softly, "Mom, let me help you." The old woman, who was indeed Audrey's mother, reached out to stop her, her face stern and stern. "You don't need any help here, Audrey. Go practice your dance." Audrey's face darkened slightly, then a sweet smile returned. She stood up and walked to the open space in front of her mother. "Mom, I'll dance for you." With that, Audrey tiptoed and danced around her mother like a white swan. The old woman raised herself up, squinting her eyes as she looked at her daughter. A smile of satisfaction crossed her face, now worn by fatigue. "Audrey, you dance beautifully, like a swan." Zhang Xuan, who had been hiding not far away, suddenly had a light in his eyes. An idea suddenly occurred to him, a way to get Audrey away from this troubled Europe. This idea really works. Zhang Xuan's thoughts grew increasingly excited. He immediately stepped out of the darkness and approached the still dancing Audrey Hepburn, his thin face lit up with delight, like an explorer who had stumbled upon a rare treasure. As Zhang Xuan approached, both the old woman and Audrey Hepburn noticed him, and a hint of fear crossed their faces. The sudden appearance of a strange man in a sparsely populated suburb, especially during wartime, would have made anyone wary. "Dancing, keep dancing. Why aren't you dancing?" Upon noticing Audrey pause, she nervously cried out, her face filled with anxiety. "Such a beautiful dance, how can you stop? Dancing, keep dancing." Zhang Xuan's nervous behavior startled Audrey Hepburn. Like a frightened deer, she quickly ducked behind her mother, stealing glances at the sudden appearance of Zhang Xuan, her bright, star-like eyes tinged with a hint of nervousness. Audrey's mother was worthy of being a descendant of the royal family. Even though she was in such a miserable state, her aristocratic temperament had not disappeared in the slightest. She reached out and patted her daughter who was holding her arm tightly, whispered a word of comfort, took a few steps forward and bowed, and asked in a neither humble nor arrogant manner, "Sir, may I know who you are?" Zhang Xuan was startled as if he had just seen the old woman. He lifted the fur hat on his head, bowed and returned a standard gentleman salute. "Hello, Mom, I'm sorry to bother you." "Excuse me, Mom, is this beautiful angel your daughter?" Zhang Xuan stared at Audrey Hepburn behind the old woman without blinking. His eyes were straightforward but pure, as if he was appreciating a peerless work of art. He was so excited that he was a little incoherent. "Her beauty does not belong here, she belongs to the whole world." The old woman was shocked by Zhang Xuan's words. She was stunned for a long time before she came to her senses and asked again, "Excuse me, who are you?" There was a hint of vigilance in her tone, as if she regarded Zhang Xuan as a lunatic. "Excuse me, Mom. I forgot to introduce myself," Zhang Xuan said with an awkward smile. "I'm Alex Zhang. You can call me Alex or Xuan. I'm a Hollywood director stranded in Europe. I happened to see your daughter dancing, and I want to take her to Hollywood to make a movie, letting her beauty shine around the world." Hearing these words, Hollywood, director, movie, Audrey, a movie lover since childhood, couldn't help but step out from behind the old woman, her small face lit with excitement. "Are you a director?" The old woman was skeptical. Zhang Xuan looked no more than his early 20s, tall and thin, though handsome. He looked nothing like a director, more like a celebrity. Initially, Zhang Xuan had intended to say screenwriter, but, realizing the obvious inferiority of director, he changed his words on the spot. However, this change of phrase put Zhang Xuan in an impossible position. At least he'd given Victor a role in Ghost. Claiming he was the screenwriter was understandable, but this director. But Zhang Xuan couldn't let himself get caught at this point. He nodded and said seriously, "I'm working on my second film, and your daughter will be the star." To lure Audrey Hepburn to America, Zhang Xuan had to keep up the pretense, still mumbling to himself that if he could just give Victor a name in Ghost, it wouldn't count as a deception. Audrey Hepburn was thrilled, eager to jump out and follow Zhang Xuan to the film. However, her mother sternly stopped the girl's advances. She was an adult, and wouldn't hand her daughter over to a stranger just because of a few words. "I'm sorry, my daughter isn't interested in movies," the old woman said sternly, completely shielding Audrey Hepburn from view. Zhang Xuan watched Audrey Hepburn, who was jumping up and down behind the old woman, struggling to escape, and chuckled inwardly. "Madam, you don't believe me, do you?" The old woman remained silent, staring at Zhang Xuan intently. "Madam, in this chaotic war, I can't prove my identity." Zhang Xuan remained silent for a moment before speaking. "Come with me to England. I'll take you to meet someone. Once you meet her, you'll believe me." "Who?" "Churchill." The old woman, having heard Zhang Xuan's words, had already branded him a liar. her tone dripping with sarcasm. Zhang Xuan, rebuked, could only smile wryly. Of course not. I'm taking you to meet Vivian Lee. I believe with her testimony, my identity is no longer in question, right, Vivian Lee? Gone with the wind, the old woman didn't cover Audrey's mouth. Hepburn couldn't help but scream out in surprise, her excitement evident. Zhang Xuan had been observing Audrey's mother. Seeing her expression seem to relax a little, he nodded and smiled slightly, saying, "Yes, that's her. My first film stars her. I'm sure it'll be in theaters soon." Continuing his efforts, Zhang Xuan soothed Audrey's mother's heart, completely extinguishing her doubts. "Here's $10,000. Consider it your daughter's fee for starring in my film. As the Chinese proverb goes, money talks." So, before leaving America, Zhang Xuan specifically asked Howard for some money, intending to use it to pave the way in special circumstances. Unexpectedly, the first sum he spent was on Audrey Hepburn. Looking at the neatly stacked stack of US dollars in her hands, the old woman completely lost her composure. She looked at Zhang Xuan with a hint of anxiety in her eyes. "Mr. Alex, you really didn't lie to us, Mom, please believe me. Every word I said is true." He made this promise, but secretly Zhang Xuan was muttering that even if it wasn't true now, it would be true once you arrived in America. "Mom, let's get out of this hellhole full of cops as soon as possible." Zhang Xuan saw that Audrey's mother was already losing her composure and couldn't help but add fuel to the fire. "The cops are a bunch of warmongers. It's not safe here. Let's go to England first." These words struck the old woman's heart. Not long ago, her brothers and relatives were tragically killed by the cops. Thinking of her daughter's life under constant threat, the old woman finally sighed, tightly grasped Audrey Hepburn's hands behind her, looked up at Zhang Xuan, and slowly said, "Everything is up to Mr. Alex." Chapter 13 Red Skull. "Madam, let's go now." After successfully convincing Audrey's mother, Zhang Xuan was eager to take mother and daughter away as soon as possible. After all, the Netherlands was now under Nazi rule, and danger could arise at any moment. "Mr. Alex, you can call me Ella," Audrey's mother said, a little surprised. So anxious, Zhang Xuan looked at Audrey's mother, Mrs. Ella, with a worried look on his face. He stepped closer and whispered, "Mrs. Ella, I overheard a rumor that Hitler is planning a policy of ethnic cleansing. It's very dangerous for us to stay here." Ella's face suddenly changed. She thought again of her tragically killed relatives and nodded unconsciously. Let's go now, Mom, are we really leaving here?" Audrey Hepburn, then only 11 years old, was filled with sadness at the thought of leaving her familiar home. She was reluctant to leave. Zhang Xuan saw the sadness in Audrey's brown eyes, and a wave of pity welled up in his heart. He said, "Of course, Audrey, you're an angel who's descended to earth. You don't belong here." In his excitement, Zhang Xuan didn't notice he'd spoken Audrey's name. At that point, Audrey's name was Etta. Fortunately, the restless Audrey and her daughter didn't notice. A moment later, Ella led Audrey, dressed simply, out of the house. In her right hand, she carried a large package, weighing down Ella's exposed arm until it turned slightly blue. Looking at the cloth bag, nearly half the height of Mrs. Ella, Zhang Xuan smiled wryly. "Mrs. Ella, there's no need to bring so much." Mrs. Ella was startled, looking down at the package in her hands, a hint of hesitation. These were their only possessions. "Mrs. Ella, do you have money or anything else?" Zhang Xuan pointed to the pocket of Mrs. Ella's clothes, where the $10,000 he had just given her were stored. "Besides, it's hard for us to travel with so much stuff. I think we should just leave everything alone and just travel like this. It's lighter." Seeing Mrs. Ella still hesitant, Zhang Xuan reached out and took the package from her hand, set it aside, and then led the mother and daughter back the way they had come. Ella glanced at the package Zhang Xuan had left with some reluctance, but ultimately, without a word, she held Audrey's hand and followed Zhang Xuan closely. After just a few steps, Zhang Xuan suddenly reached out to stop the mother and daughter behind him, his eyes slightly glaring. In the distance, a series of sidecar motorcycles appeared on the road, and 3 or 4 German soldiers in German uniforms could be vaguely seen on them. They looked like they were coming with bad intentions. Zhang Xuan, feeling a sense of unease, immediately led the mother and daughter into the forest beside the road, hiding themselves in the lush trees. "What's going on?" Ella also saw the monsters in the distance, but she paid them no attention. In fact, neither she nor Audrey showed any concern, only looking at Zhang Xuan with a puzzled expression. Zhang Xuan shook his head, his face serious. I feel something's wrong. We should be careful. He glanced up and led the mother and daughter through the forest. In fact, Zhang Xuan's intuition was spot on. These monsters had suddenly appeared just for him. His reckless use of teleportation had finally attracted the attention of the special forces. Sir, no target. A young sergeant trotted up to an armored vehicle, stood with his legs together, and shouted. We suspect the target has fled. With a click, the armored vehicle's door swung open, and a figure with a red skull head stepped out. The two eyes in the sunken skull sockets exuded a chilling madness. If Zhang Xuan had seen this person, he would have recognized him immediately. Wasn't it the Red Skull from the movie Captain America? What are you waiting for? Chase him. We must find him. Red Skull's muscleless face was expressionless, and he breathed heavily through his flared nostrils, clearly furious. The young sergeant, not even daring to look at Red Skull, responded with a snort and quickly turned and ran away. A moment later, dozens of police dispersed and gave chase. What's going on? Zhang Xuan was frustrated. He had been dodging the police with Audrey and her daughter, hoping to catch the train out of Anhang, but he hadn't expected the entire Anhang area to be overrun by police. Until now, Zhang Xuan hadn't realized he had caught Red Skull's attention, and that he had even personally intervened. Ella and Audrey also realized something was amiss. Anhang wasn't particularly crowded with police before, but now, they were everywhere, even in the most secluded areas. What do we do now? Ella's face was filled with worry as she watched the police scouring the streets. Zhang Xuan's brow furrowed. He had a hunch that the sudden appearance of demons at Anhang might be connected to him, making it difficult for him to escape with Audrey and her daughter. Where can I send a telegram? After a moment's hesitation, Zhang Xuan decided he'd have to contact Howard. The newspaper office. There's a telegraph machine at the Anhang newspaper office. I've seen it once, Audrey whispered, raising her hand. Audrey was still somewhat intimidated by Zhang Xuan and didn't dare approach him. Zhang Xuan could only smile wryly. He knew he'd have to get closer to his goddess someday. For now, he'd better find a way back to America. Led by Audrey, the three of them journeyed through the streets and alleys, dodging demons. After a short while, they finally arrived at a small courtyard not far from the Anhang Conservatory of Music. This was the location of the Anhang newspaper office. Due to the epidemic, the Anhang newspaper office had long since closed, and the place had been abandoned, long deserted. The telegraph is in there, Audrey said, pointing to a room in the southwest corner of the courtyard. Her forehead was already covered in beads of sweat from the constant rush, and her face was slightly flushed. Wait here, I'll send a telegram, Zhang Xuan instructed, entering the southwest corner where the telegraph machine stood. He tested it and found it still worked. In his previous life, telephones and computers were commonplace, and the telegraph, an old-fashioned artifact, had long been obsolete. Zhang Xuan had never even seen one. Since arriving in this era, Zhang Xuan had had to learn to use this ancient artifact. After typing the telegram with a somewhat awkward hand, Zhang Xuan didn't leave immediately, knowing Howard would call back soon. As Zhang Xuan expected, just a few minutes later, the telegraph rang again. Howard sent Zhang Xuan a written map, explaining how to return safely to England. After reading it, Zhang Xuan couldn't help but smile, thinking to himself that Howard was indeed reliable. According to Howard, Germany and France were currently locked in a fierce war, making it impossible to return to England via France. As for sailing directly from the Netherlands to England, that was unrealistic, as the English Channel was swarming with German warships and aircraft. Therefore, the best route was through Germany, across Denmark, into Norway, and then from Norway, by boat around the North Sea back to England. Looking at the route map Howard had sent him, Zhang Xuan suddenly thought of something. He remembered that in Captain America, Red Skull found the Tesseract in a Norwegian church. Should I go look for it? The thought of the Tesseract stirred in Zhang Xuan's heart. The Tesseract was a valuable item. But when Zhang Xuan turned his head and saw Audrey Hepburn shivering in the autumn breeze in the courtyard outside the window, he immediately extinguished the thought. He had come to Europe with only one goal, to bring Audrey Hepburn to America. He didn't care about anything else. Chapter 14, Camping in a Cave. After countless arduous journeys, Zhang Xuan and Hepburn finally crossed the German border and arrived in Denmark. They were met with devastating news: the Nazis were wreaking havoc on Jews across Europe. The genocidal policy of the mustache had finally come to fruition. Alex, what do we do now? Ella, holding Hepburn, hid by a low wall, her bright eyes peeking out, her face, dusty and stained with worry. On the street, teams of police armed with submachine guns were escorting a group of ragged people, old men, women, and children. Their destination was Auschwitz, a concentration camp in Poland. At that moment, the notoriety of Auschwitz had not yet spread, and everyone's face showed only a slight resistance, not much fear. They didn't know the bloody death that awaited them, but Zhang Xuan did. He desperately wanted to rescue these people, but the sight of the heavily armed police filing the streets forced him to abandon this unrealistic idea. His face was etched in shame, his mind racing. This small Danish town was rife with police, arresting people everywhere. Staying in the city was extremely dangerous. While the genocide of the mustache tribes was primarily directed against the Jews, in reality, all non-Aryans were exterminated. If they remained in the city, they might be captured by the enemy. After several days of traveling, the angelic Hepburn was already exhausted and fell into a light sleep. As soon as they stopped, Hepburn woke up immediately, rubbing her hazy eyes and asking in confusion, "Why aren't you leaving?" Zhang Xuan gave a wry smile and said helplessly, "There's no way to leave now. We need to find a place to hide, okay?" In just a few days, Hepburn had become extremely dependent on Zhang Xuan. She would do whatever Zhang Xuan said, never objecting. There was no place to hide in the city, so Zhang Xuan led Hepburn and her daughter, avoiding the enemy and fleeing the city, into the dense forests outside. Denmark, located in northern Europe, has a cold climate. Although it was only September, the night temperature was already below zero, and the wind in the mountains and forests made the temperature even lower. Even after finding shelter in a cave, the three of them were still shivering with cold. Seeing Hepburn sneeze again, her long nose bruised and blue from the cold, and a stream of clear mucus running down her face, Zhang Xuan finally couldn't help himself and stood up with a look of heartache. "No need to worry about that, let's build a fire." Zhang Xuan had initially held off on starting a fire out of fear that the light would attract fire, but now he had no choice. He couldn't just stand by and watch Hepburn suffer in the cold. "Wait for me," Zhang Xuan instructed, and quickly ran out of the cave. Once out of the cave, he teleported and reappeared in the small town below the mountain. Zhang Xuan had no wilderness survival experience and no ability to make fire by drilling wood, so he had to borrow a fire from the town. It would have been even better if he could find some hot food along the way. After days of traveling, the three of them hadn't had a hot meal. Fortunately, it was only nightfall, and many families had just finished their dinner. Zhang Xuan was lucky enough to find quite a few delicious dishes, open-faced sandwiches with beef and vegetables smothered in butter on brown bread, and a large plate of roast pork with red cabbage. After leaving a few dollars, Zhang Xuan unceremoniously devoured the delicious food, taking several thick leather jackets with him. Back in the cave, Zhang Xuan draped the jacket over Ella, who shivered as she cradled Hepburn, and casually set down the food in his hand. "You to eat first. I'll go find some dry wood and start a fire, thank you, Alex." Ella tightened her jacket around herself and turned to look at Zhang Xuan with gratitude. "If it weren't for you, we'd be, I'm so ashamed. If it weren't for me, my wife and Hepburn wouldn't have suffered this." Looking at the drowsy Hepburn, Zhang Xuan began to doubt the wisdom of his European trip. "If it weren't for you, we'd probably be in a Nazi concentration camp by now." Ella was lucid and intelligent. Although they had endured hardships along the way, these hardships were nothing compared to the constant danger of remaining in the German-occupied zone. Ella was deeply grateful to Zhang Xuan. Zhang Xuan smiled wryly, shook his head, turned, and ran out of the cave. A moment later, he returned, clutching a large bundle of dead branches and rotten wood. After lighting a fire, the cold cave finally felt a hint of warmth. A hint of color returned to Hepburn's face, and she rubbed her eyes and slowly woke up. "It's so warm, Hepburn, this is for you." Zhang Xuan pulled out an aluminum lunchbox and opened it. Inside, he found a bowl of steaming spaghetti. Zhang Xuan knew that Hepburn loved spaghetti, and he had searched the town for a long time before finally finding one in the kitchen of a Japanese officer. Hepburn jumped out of Ella's arms and eagerly took the lunchbox. She scooped up the spaghetti with her fork and stuffed it into her mouth, not caring about her ladylike manners. She ate with great joy. "Audrey, have you forgotten what I taught you?" Seeing Hepburn's unladylike eating habits, Ella glanced at Zhang Xuan with embarrassment, then frowned and began to scold her softly. Zhang Xuan smiled faintly and soothed, "Mom, Hepburn is still a child. Don't be too strict. Besides, She's been really hard on her these past few days. Let's just forget it, Ella sighed and caressed Hepburn's long, smooth hair with a look of fondness. She felt bad for letting Hepburn suffer with her. But Hepburn's next words made Ella feel a sense of regret that girls grow up too fast. Seeing that her mother didn't blame her, Hepburn grinned at Xuan and said proudly, "Thank you, brother. You're always the best to me." In no time, Hepburn had devoured the entire lunchbox of pasta. Wiping the meat sauce from the corner of her mouth, Hepburn touched her slightly bloated belly, looking very satisfied. After enjoying the delicious food, the three of them fell asleep while chatting in the warm cave. The fire in the forest quickly attracted the attention of the police in the city below the mountain. Fortunately, because the nights in Denmark were too cold, even the disciplined German soldiers were unwilling to come out. They stayed in the warm rooms, thinking of waiting for the sun to come out the next day before going up the mountain to check. Because of the laziness of the police, Zhang Xuan and the other two escaped a disaster. The next day, when Zhang Xuan woke up, he remembered that he had fallen asleep without any precautions last night. He couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat and secretly warned himself, "I must be more careful in the future. I was lucky that no one came to find me last night. I may not be so lucky next time." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 Accident. After a night's rest, Audrey was in high spirits, even waking up in the morning with a spirited ballet performance. The soft, early morning sunlight filtered through the sparse trees, illuminating the dancing Hepburn, who looked like a forest elf, charming and charming. So beautiful, Alex. He would use Alex from now on. Zhang Xuan would only use it on special occasions. Was mesmerized, captivated, and oblivious to his earlier caution, his eyes focused solely on Audrey. Alex's gaze was so intense that Ella, standing beside him, felt a strange tinge of envy. As someone who had experienced this, Ella could not fail to see Alex's love for Audrey. Although Alex was over 10 years older than Audrey, Ella felt that as long as Audrey was willing, as a mother, she would not object. In these war-torn times, Audrey was fortunate to have found a man who loved her and was capable of protecting her. After the dance, Audrey skipped over to Zhang Xuan's side. A youthful smile graced her delicate face. She clasped Alex's arm and said triumphantly, "Brother, how was your dance, Audrey?" "Good, very good." "I was stunned." Alex gently rubbed Audrey's head with his right hand and said with a smile, "I don't think anyone in the whole of America dances better than you." Audrey giggled, growing even more smug. Seeing Audrey's smug look, Alex couldn't help but pinch her nose. Then he quickly ran away, saying seriously, "It's time. We should get going too." Watching her brother run away, Audrey stamped her feet fiercely and turned to look at her mother, as if she wanted to denounce her despicable brother. Before Audrey could say anything, Ella walked away with a strange smile on her face, whispering, "I didn't see anything. You're all bullying me." Audrey snorted softly and started chasing Zhang Xuan. She wanted revenge for the broken nose she'd probably gotten. Shortly after the three left, the belated arrival of the police found the cave they'd been staying in the previous night. "The fire just went out a while ago." They shouldn't have gone far. A German private reached over the fire, which was covered with a thin layer of earth, to test the temperature and looked up at the sergeant nearby. The sergeant shouted, "Chase!" It must be said that the Germans were generally very skilled in military operations. It didn't take long for them to find the traces of the three men's departure and followed the trail, chasing the entire German squad. Unfortunately, even then, Alex hadn't realized his whereabouts had been exposed. "Brother, when I get to America, can I really become a big star?" As big a star as Vivian Lee. Audrey lay on Alex's back, her legs dangling unsteadily. She straightened her body and imitated Vivian Lee's tone, reciting the classic lines from Gone with the Wind. "After all, tomorrow is another day, Audrey." Alex just called out a name when she was interrupted by Audrey unreasonably. "Red, you should call me Scarlet." Red and Scarlet were the names of the male and female protagonists in Gone with the Wind respectively. Scarlet was played by Vivian Lee. Audrey must have gotten addicted to acting. Alex smiled bitterly and shook his head. He hadn't seen Gone with the Wind. He only knew the simple plot of the story. Forget about the lines. It would be difficult for him to act with Audrey. "Why aren't you talking? Don't you want to be Red?" Audrey's little head curled around Alex's neck, her bright eyes fixed on him. Alex felt a warm air against his ear, and for some reason, a wave of nervousness washed over him. He blurted out, "Red abandoned Scarlet in the end, but Alex will never leave Audrey." 11 years old was no longer a child, and Audrey, vaguely aware of the subtle emotions between men and women, was stunned by Alex's blunt confession. A flush washed over her face, and her breathing quickened. As soon as the words left his mouth, Alex realized he'd said the wrong thing. What if he scared Audrey? Luckily, Alex had some quick wit and added, "Brother and sister, family, forever inseparable." Alex didn't notice that Audrey's face darkened at his words, and the words brother and sister kept echoing in her mind. Ella stood aside, taking in the expressions of both men. She just smiled slightly and didn't want to explain. She let the young people make their own decisions. After a moment's silence, Audrey became lively again, dragging Alex to act with her. It must be said that Audrey was a natural actor and acted very well. As for Alex, even if he worked hard, he would be a third-rate actor at best. They played and quarreled all the way, and the three of them didn't walk very fast. After only an hour, Audrey was already complaining about being hungry. They had rushed on without having breakfast, and after walking for so long, not only Audrey but also Alex was hungry. Alex carefully lowered Audrey from his back, then opened a pocket on his waist and pulled out some leftover food from last night. "We're tired after walking for so long. Let's rest here and eat something." At that moment, a thought struck Alex. He turned and looked behind him, his brows furrowed slightly, a hint of sternness in his voice. "You guys eat first. I'll go check over there." Ella and Audrey noticed Alex's abnormality. They couldn't even think about eating, and looked at Alex nervously. "Alex, what's wrong?" Alex looked around solemnly, shook his head, and whispered, "I don't think something's right. Everyone, be careful." He then hugged Audrey back to his chest, gathered the food, and pulled Ella behind a large rock. Alex's past life had made him extremely alert, almost instinctive. He teleported away at the slightest sign of trouble. But that wouldn't work now. There were two other people around. While teleportation can carry a person along, the required psychic energy increases exponentially, the transmission distance is greatly reduced, and it also places a significant strain on the soul. Alex's teleportation abilities haven't yet recovered to the level of his previous life. He can only transport two people 3 times at most before his soul is overwhelmed and needs at least a day to recover. A short while later, a small group of soldiers hurried over, only to turn back a short distance. "The trail ends here, the person should be nearby." Upon hearing this, the German squad immediately dispersed, carefully searching the surroundings. Alex couldn't understand the garbled German, but from their actions, he knew he was in trouble. Watching the approaching German troops, Alex turned to Ella and Audrey and whispered, "No matter what happens, don't make a sound." "Absolutely don't make a sound." Ella and Audrey nodded, their faces tense as they looked at Alex. Alex held Audrey in one arm and Ella's waist in the other, enduring the excruciating pain of teleportation. His eyes fixed on a large, leafy tree 200 meters away. That was Alex's target. 200 meters was the maximum distance that teleportation could take 2 people. In an instant, the 3 of them disappeared from behind the boulder, reappearing atop the tree's trunk. As soon as they landed on the trunk, Alex felt dizzy and almost unsteady, a sign of immense pressure on his soul. Fortunately, Ella, standing nearby, noticed and supported Alex, preventing him from falling. After a 10-minute rest, the German troops below showed no sign of leaving, meticulously and rigorously searching every inch of the ground, even the narrowest cracks in the rock. Observing the meticulous German troops, Alex knew his current location was unsafe and would be discovered if he stayed any longer. To escape this dangerous situation as quickly as possible, Alex took a desperate gamble and used teleportation again. However, this time, something went wrong. The immense pressure on Alex's soul during the teleportation process overwhelmed him, and he fainted. Alex's fainting spell naturally failed, and he fell out of the void mid-transmigration. Chapter 16 Auschwitz. On a speeding train, a dusty little girl, her face covered in dust, tightly embraced a young man. She looked up at her mother, her slightly gray eyes filled with worry. "Mom, when will my brother wake up?" The mother wiped her tear-stained cheeks and softly soothed, "Audrey, my brother will wake up soon. Let's pray for him together, okay?" This mother and daughter duo were none other than Ella and Audrey Hepburn, and in Audrey's arms lay Alex. In the Danish mountains, Alex had fallen into coma after forcibly leading someone to teleport. The 3 people who had been exposed were captured by the police and immediately put on this train, bound for Auschwitz, Poland. Audrey clasped her hands gently, closed her eyes, and quietly prayed, "Lord, please have mercy on my brother. Please save him and let him wake up soon. I'll do anything for him to wake up." This incongruous prayer left Ella feeling both amused and despairing. Looking at Alex in Audrey's arms, Ella's heart suddenly became heavy. A whole day had passed, and Alex still showed no signs of waking up. "I see he's been lying here. What's wrong with him? Is he sick?" A thin middle-aged man slowly squeezed over from the corner of the car, pointing at Alex in Audrey's arms and said, "I'm a doctor, maybe I can help." Ella didn't know why Alex suddenly fell into coma, but she also guessed that it must be caused by the magical teleportation magic. Looking at the uninvited doctor in front of her, Ella didn't know whether she should let him see her, for fear that it would expose Alex's uniqueness. Ella was still hesitating, but Audrey on the side couldn't wait to grab the middle-aged man, shouting anxiously, "Doctor, please save my brother and let him wake up quickly." Seeing this, Ella no longer stopped him, and signaled Audrey to let go of Alex, and turned to look at the middle-aged man. "Then thank you for your help, sir. It's okay." The middle-aged man stretched out his right hand to turn over Alex's eyelids, and while checking carefully, he said casually, "I'm Jacob Eisenhart. You can call me Jacob." "Hello, Jacob. My name is Ella." Feeling Jacob's kindness, Ella couldn't help but relax. She pointed at Audrey, then pointed at Alex lying on the floor, and said with a smile, "This is my daughter, Audrey. My son, Alex." "That's a coincidence. I also have a son and a daughter, Max and Ruth. They are also in the car." Jacob chuckled and turned to look at Ella. "There's nothing wrong with Alex. He's just overworked. He just needs a rest." Audrey held on to Jacob, as if worried he'd leave. "But my brother's been asleep for almost a whole day and night." "Oh, Audrey, your brother will wake up soon, believe me," Jacob said gently, patting Hepburn's shoulder. "Really?" Audrey looked at Alex doubtfully, a hint of anticipation in her eyes. As they waited, 3 more people squeezed in. Leading them was a middle-aged woman, each holding a child, a boy and a girl, slightly younger than Audrey. "This is my wife, Edie," Jacob said, a faint smile on his thin face. He pointed at the 3 children and introduced them. "Max, Ruth, this is Audrey." "Audrey, these are Max and Ruth." Audrey glanced at the 2 children, a greeting, then turned back to Alex, her face filled with anxiety. To Audrey, her brother was clearly more important than the 2 children before her. Suddenly, Audrey cried out in delight, "Wake up! Brother's awake!" Brother just blinked. Alex awoke, found himself in Audrey's arms, surrounded by a crowd of people, and the stench of decay filled his nose and mouth. "Where is this place, brother? You're awake. You're finally awake." Audrey ignored Alex's question and hugged Alex's head tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. Alex was momentarily confused, stunned for a moment before regaining consciousness. Remembering that he had suddenly lost consciousness during the teleportation, Alex sat up suddenly, his face pale as he looked around. The dimly lit carriage was packed with people. Alex's heart skipped a beat, a foreboding feeling welling up. He turned to Ella and asked hesitantly, "Have we been captured?" Ella looked at Alex, nodded, and whispered, "We're on a train now, heading to Auschwitz." Auschwitz. Alex was completely stunned at this, his face draining even more of the color. "Let's go. We have to leave now." Alex grabbed Hepburn and Ella without hesitation, intending to use teleportation to escape the train of death. But just as Alex was about to activate the teleportation, a sharp pain in his head flared up, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Ella, knowing what Alex was about to do, saw Alex's agony and quickly spoke to him, soothing him. "Alex, don't try. You just woke up." Alex fought a stabbing pain in his head and tried several times, but unfortunately, none of them worked. The teleportation was temporarily unusable. Alex's breath deflated, and he became completely dejected. He clutched his golden hair with both hands, burying his face in his arms. Thinking of the immense pain he had caused the angel, Alex burst into tears. Alex now deeply regretted his rashness, his arrogance, thinking he could save the angel from suffering on his own. But in the end, the situation was even worse than before, and the angel was about to be captured and sent to a concentration camp. Hearing Alex's cries, Audrey froze, and so did Ella. Eisenhart was equally stunned, and the young boy, Max, even thought with a touch of contempt, "This older brother is so fragile." I haven't even cried. Watching the train gradually slow down, Alex knew they had reached Auschwitz. Auschwitz, near Warsaw, Poland's capital, was home to over 40 concentration camps where millions would be murdered in the coming years. It was a veritable factory of death. Sadly, Alex was the only one on the train who knew its horror. For 3 days, everyone had only a single piece of black bread to eat. The starving people rushed down the train as soon as it stopped, having been warned, "There'll be food when we get there." Alex, with his arms around Audrey and Ella, shielded them, letting the frantic crowd pass by. Only after everyone had left the train did Alex slowly lead Audrey and Ella out, the Eisenhurts following close behind. After 2 days of spending time together, Alex had a favorable impression of the Eisenhurts and offered them some quiet advice, urging them to be cautious. Once outside the train, they were met with groups of police officers, guns drawn, standing solemnly around them. Anyone who showed any signs of activity would be mercilessly beaten. Several people were already lying on the ground nearby. Alex could only sigh helplessly. He had originally hoped to escape during the chaos, but now it seemed his chance was gone. Following the crowd, guided roughly by the police officers, Alex and the others slowly passed through an iron gate. Inside, they arrived at an open area. Surrounded by dozens of low-rise brick buildings, and rows of armed police officers stood guard. Don't get excited, no matter what happens. Alex knew these police officers were merciless and would kill without blinking an eye. Provoking them would only bring bad luck. Everyone looked at each other in bewilderment. They might separate us, but don't worry, I'll find you. Alex remembered movies about World War II where men and women were separated in concentration camps. Audrey tightened her grip around Alex's arm, her face tense. "I don't want to be separated from my brother." Alex tightened his grip as well, looking at Audrey and softly saying, "Audrey, I'll definitely get you out. Do you trust me?" Audrey tilted her head and nodded firmly. "Audrey, I trust you." Chapter 17, Wall of Death. To Alex's surprise, after being herded into the center of the clearing, the large group didn't immediately split up. A police officer emerged from a corner, his white gloves glaring against the dim light. He didn't even glance at the chaotic crowd before him. His hands tangled, his head tilted slightly upward, as if lost in thought. The police, who had been roughly escorting them, retreated to the side. The unchecked crowd grew increasingly noisy, with some even daring enough to clamor for food. Alex looked at the police officer and felt a fear like that of a venomous snake. He was an extremely dangerous man. Alex didn't dare move, and at his warning, the Eisenhart family also behaved properly, refusing to make a single movement. A moment later, perhaps because no one was watching, the crowd grew even more reckless, their shouting intensifying. "You're looking for death," Alex cursed under his breath, decisively pulling Ella and Audrey to the edge of the crowd. The Eisenhart family followed. The officer calmly raised his hand, turning it over and examining it carefully, mumbling something. Then, like a tiger unleashed from its cage, the who had been motionless, rushed into the crowd, dragging out those who had been shouting the loudest. As some tried to struggle, the butt of a rifle struck them in the head without hesitation, and blood immediately gushed out. More than 20 people were dragged out and pulled against a wall. An officer in white gloves approached, a faint smile on his face, and spoke slowly. Behind him, a slightly stooped figure in a black leather jacket and rimless glasses stepped forward and introduced himself in English with a strange accent. "This is SS Totenkopf, Captain Rudolf Fernandi, current commandant of Auschwitz." He pointed at the 20 or so men cornered and shouted angrily, "These people have disturbed the peace of Auschwitz, and therefore, Commandant Rudolf will sentence them to death." The interpreter finished speaking in English, then spoke something in French or another language Alex couldn't understand. Alex guessed it was a repetition of the previous statement. Alex turned his head slightly, looking coldly at Rudolf in white gloves, then at the emotional interpreter. Furious, he felt, but he had no recourse. He could only shield Audrey's eyes with his hands and watch helplessly as the 20 or so men fell to the gunfire. After the direct threat of death, everyone quieted down, as docile as lambs. The subsequent grouping went incredibly smoothly. No one dared to argue, watching their loved ones part with sorrow on their faces. Ella and the others had been warned by Alex long ago, and although they were somewhat reluctant, they still obediently followed the leader to their destination. Alex, Jacob, and Max followed another group of soldiers in another direction. The large group of men were divided into several battalions, each with over 500 men, and assigned to makeshift low-rise brick buildings filled with rows of bunk beds. The bunk beds had several tiers, each only 30 centimeters high, barely enough for lying down. There was no place to sit. At that moment, Alex regretted it deeply. Across Auschwitz, in a 3-story building with white walls and black tiles, Rudolf leaned back on a sofa, a glass of amber liquor in his hand, a grim smile on his face. The Fuhrer said, "These people are useless. If we can kill them, we'll kill them. If we can't, we'll bury them alive." The translator stood beside him, bowing and nodding. Long live the Fuhrer. A moment later, the translator left the building and walked into the adjacent office building, returning to his office. Before he even entered his office, his expression suddenly changed. He motioned to the police behind him not to follow him and walked into the office alone. "Sebastian Shaw, the king is very dissatisfied with your ability to do things." A figure walked out from the corner of the office, with arrogance on the young face. "Why is there no news about the teleporter until today?" The translator, Sebastian Shaw, glanced at the young man. Anger flashed in his eyes, pretending to be panicked, and anxiously explained, "After all, this is not our territory, and we can't search it on a large scale. The secret sentry stationed in Hydra sent news that they have lost the teleporter, as if he had evaporated from the earth. Because of some special things, the Red Skull also gave up the pursuit and immediately rushed to Norway and Northern Europe. I don't know what he is going to do." Seeing the panic on Sebastian Shaw's face, the young man felt very proud, nodded pretentiously and said, "Don't give up the pursuit. He is very important to us. It's just mastering teleportation." "Don't we still have the Red Devil?" Sebastian Shaw looked very puzzled and asked cautiously. The young man snorted coldly, turned to look at Sebastian, and said slowly with a hint of threat, "Sebastian, don't ask questions you shouldn't ask. The more you know, the sooner you'll die." Sebastian's face darkened, and cold sweat covered his lowered head. After a moment, Sebastian looked up. The young man was no longer in the room. Sebastian straightened up, slowly walked to the window, turned his head to look out at the open space, and whispered with hatred, "One day, I will kill every one of you." In the early days of the Auschwitz concentration camps, people were not as brutal as they were in later years. People were sent directly to the gas chambers, and those who died were thrown into the crematorium. The current concentration camps still hide some of the same characteristics of concentration camps, with people isolated and assigned various tasks. Of course, this did not mean that the camps were safe. On the third day in Auschwitz, an old man was working in the quarry when a small stone was knocked off by a pickaxe. Unfortunately, the stone hit a worker. The old man was then beaten to death, with more than a dozen thugs surrounding him, punching and kicking him. No matter how he pleaded for mercy, he was unstoppable. On the fourth day, a man accidentally dropped his bread while eating. Rudolf, the white gloves, happened to see it. He was then brought to the wall where the 20-odd men had been executed. The white gloves, accusing him of wasting food, shot him in the head. Everyone in the concentration camp was ordered to stand in the open space and watch. On the fifth day, 8 more men died, again at the wall. On the sixth day, 26 men died, also at the wall. On the seventh day, 17 strong men rose up, killed the 8 thugs, seized their guns, and attempted to break free. In the end, all 17 were killed, their bodies hung above the open space, where they rotted. The story didn't end there. One by one, the remaining 483 members of the same camp as the 17 strong men were brought to the wall and shot. That night, the camp erupted in relentless gunfire. Everyone hid in their low brick buildings, trembling in fear. Blood pooled beside the wall. The name Death Wall spread throughout the camp, and no one dared to walk past it, or even look at it. Chapter 18 Young Magneto. In his previous life, Alex had accomplished many great deeds, and thus offended many, but he had never experienced such a brutal and inhumane massacre. 7 days, 536 lives, these two numbers constantly echoed in Alex's mind, each day a torment. He didn't know when he would approach the death wall and become a wisp of the dead beneath it. Endless fear made Alex fearless of taking any chances. Every day and every night, he seized every opportunity to practice the methods he had learned from his previous life to cultivate his spiritual power. This method, which Alex had developed in his previous life, was similar to meditation, but without the need for a specific posture. It could be practiced standing or lying down, making it the most effective way to rapidly improve spiritual power. A month passed quickly, and the death toll rose from the initial 536 to 1,272. In fact, after the initial week of frenzied slaughter, the concentration camp had become completely silent. They did whatever they were told to do, even eating excrement, without resistance. Everyone lived cautiously and humbly, hoping only to stay alive. But the always finds various excuses to trample on your dignity and rob you of your life. After a month of continuous practice, Alex's teleportation skills improved significantly, with the transmission distance increasing from the initial 1,000 meters to 3,000 meters, and the cooldown time reduced from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. Although the teleportation skills improved, escaping the concentration camp with Audrey and Ella was still impossible. That night, while everyone was fast asleep, Alex used teleportation to visit Audrey and Ella again. The facilities in the women's camp were even more rudimentary than those in the men's camp. They were 3-story long boxes, 6 feet wide and 3 feet high. In such a large area, 5 to 10 people had to sleep in them every night. A month of hellish experience had left the little angel's eyes gray, and her bloodless face was expressionless. Only when she saw Alex did she show any different emotions. Knowing her brother would be coming tonight, Audrey had been fighting sleep. Seeing Alex appear, she lowered her voice with a hint of surprise and called out, "Brother, Audrey, I'm so sorry for what you've suffered." Alex was filled with regret towards Audrey. He had originally intended to take Angel away from war-torn Europe, but he had never imagined he would end up with her in the hell of Auschwitz. Audrey raised her hand and gently wiped away the tears that had been flowing from Alex's eyes. She whispered, "Audrey, don't be afraid. I know you'll get me out." Alex gently stroked Audrey's face and nodded firmly, "Audrey, trust me. You'll get me out of here." After a few words, Audrey finally gave in and fell into deep sleep, filled with hope. Only on the nights Alex came could Audrey sleep so peacefully, free from fear. Watching Audrey fall asleep, Ella, who had been silent, spoke hesitantly. Ruth." Alex thought of Ruth, the shy, timid little girl from the Eisenhart family, who loved to hide behind her mother, Edie. Seeing Ella's expression, Alex felt a sense of unease. What's wrong? What happened? Ruth was sick yesterday, and Edie took her to the camp doctor. She hasn't been back since. Ella's voice dropped, almost inaudible. I was worried about them. Alex didn't know how he got back. He lay in bed, staring at the bedstead just a few feet away. There, slumbering, was Jacob. Alex hadn't slept all night, nor had he practiced to sharpen his psychic powers. He pondered whether he should tell Jacob the news. If he did, how should he say it? He struggled until the next morning, when a shrill bell rang, and the silent brick house suddenly became lively. Everyone dressed and hurried towards the door, fearing a beating if they were late. "Jacob." Alex hesitantly grabbed hold of Jacob. "I need to tell you something." As Jacob dressed the sleepy Max, he replied without turning back, "Alex, tell me what's going on." Edie and Ruth, maybe. Alex thought for a moment before deciding to tell Jacob the truth, but in the end, he couldn't find the words. Jacob's hands suddenly stopped. He struggled to turn his head and look at Alex, his thin face vacant. "What did you say?" Max, still dazed, suddenly opened his eyes and stared at Alex intently. "Ruth got sick the day before yesterday. Edie took her to the camp doctor, and she hasn't been back since." Alex quickly repeated the sentence and let out a long sigh. Jacob was stunned, staring at Alex with lifeless eyes, as if all life had suddenly vanished. Max roared to the sky, his face filled with grief and indignation. Alex's eyes suddenly opened wide, and he saw a scene that left him stunned. The beds in the brick house were all wooden, secured only by iron plates at the joints. But at that moment, the plates suddenly began to lift off, threatening to fly out of the wooden bed. Furthermore, the shovels and picks scattered throughout the house also took flight, flying towards them. "What's going on?" Alex looked at Max in surprise, and a thought suddenly occurred to him. Magneto, a master at manipulating metal. Is Max Magneto? Alex remembered that in the movie, Magneto was supposedly taken to a concentration camp in 1944, but it was only 1940 now, so the timeline didn't match. Besides Magneto, Alex couldn't think of anyone else in Marvel who could control metal. After a moment's pause, Alex quickly snapped back to his senses. Regardless of whether Max was Magneto or not, he absolutely couldn't be discovered, or else he'd be captured and studied by Sebastian Shaw, just like in the movie. Alex reached out to grab Max when a sudden electric current shot from Max's shoulder to his palm, flowing down his arm and through his entire body, leaving him numb and tingling. The feeling was fleeting, and Alex didn't think much of it, dismissing it as static electricity. He grabbed Max's shoulders with both hands and shook them fiercely. "Max, don't get excited, don't get excited." Max was shaken awake by Alex, and his roaring stopped. The flying iron objects in the air instantly fell to the ground. Max seemed to have lost all his strength and fell into Alex's arms. Glancing around, everyone was busy running towards the door and hadn't noticed them. Alex couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and quickly turned to Jacob. "Jacob, we must survive, for them." Jacob's frail body suddenly shook, and his eyes regained a hint of spirit, but there was nothing but hatred in them. "Yes, you're right, we must survive and avenge them." Chapter 19 New Abilities. Stark Industries, New York, USA. Steve and Bucky approached Howard again. "Mr. Stark, no news yet." Alex had been gone for over a month, and with no news at all, they were deeply worried and frequently inquired about him. Seeing Steve and Bucky return gave Howard a headache. He was also worried about Alex's safety. He had contacted numerous people, including higher-ranking figures in the British and French military, seeking information about him. Unfortunately, there was no news. Howard now dreaded seeing Alex's friends, especially Marilyn Monroe. Howard didn't know what to say, so he could only give a wry smile and remain silent. Steve and Bucky's faces darkened, a touch of disappointment. Then, "Mr. Stark, we're leaving. Please let us know if you have any news." Howard sighed, thinking to himself, "Alex, where the hell are you?" Auschwitz, Poland. After a day's work, the camp quickly fell silent. Jacob and Max retired to bed, seemingly oblivious to the morning's news. But Alex knew they were simply burying their hatred deep within their hearts, waiting for it to erupt one day. Lying in bed, his eyes open, Alex stared blankly at the bed, thinking back to Max's outburst that morning. Although the timing doesn't match, there's no one in the Marvel Universe besides Magneto who can control metal. Max must be Magneto. With Magneto, escaping Auschwitz shouldn't be a problem. Alex turned his head to look at the bedside. A piece of metal had lifted up there. It was Max who had caused it that morning. Max has just awakened his X-powers and can control metal as easily as the experienced Magneto in the movies. We need to find a way to train him. Recalling the scene from the movie, Alex's attention unconsciously focused on the piece of metal. And then, to Alex's surprise, the piece of metal bent for no apparent reason. Max. Alex's first thought was Max, and he peeked up to the third floor, where Max's bed lay. But to Alex's surprise, Max was normal, breathing steadily, and the bending of the metal didn't seem to be his fault. Alex looked around in fear. Could there be another Magneto? After searching for a long time, he couldn't find anyone amiss. Everyone in the brick house, except himself, was sound asleep. Surprised, Alex looked back at the piece of metal. It had indeed bent. He stared at it for a long time, and suddenly it began to move again, no longer bending, but returning to the bedside. Alex covered his mouth, a look of disbelief on his face. Realizing the possibility of a second Magneto, Alex became extremely cautious, telepathically observing his surroundings. But just then, a flash of inspiration struck Alex. The previously motionless piece of metal began to move again. Filled with wonder, Alex tried to control it. To his surprise, it did just as he had hoped, rising from the bed again. Alex then tried to control a shovel beside the bed. As he wished, the shovel soared into the air, constantly changing shape according to his wishes. Looking at the shovel that was constantly twisting its shape in the air, Alex couldn't help but get excited. Teleportation is indeed very powerful, but it is far inferior in combat. Unless Alex can recover to the level of his previous life and have unlimited teleportation, Alex has always hoped to have a powerful combat skill. The sudden arrival of this ability finally made Alex's wish come true. Alex was so excited that he even forgot to exercise his telekinesis. He played with shovels and other various metal products all night. The shrill bell rang again, and the silent brick house instantly came back to life. Everyone was busy. Alex also woke up. He didn't remember how long he played last night. He fell asleep until he couldn't hold on any longer. After a nap, Alex only recovered a little bit of energy, and dark circles appeared under his eyes. Seeing Alex's sleepy expression, Jacob grew concerned. "Alex, are you okay?" Alex waved him off, his face still tinged with the excitement of last night. "No, I'm fine." As he spoke, Alex suddenly thought of playing with a metal piece beside the bed again. But to Alex's surprise, the piece didn't stir at all. What's going on? Wasn't it fine last night? Alex couldn't accept it. Was he hallucinating? Seeing Alex's expression change suddenly, Jacob became even more worried. He had just learned the bad news about his wife and daughter yesterday, and he didn't want to see Alex get hurt again. Max also reached out and took Alex's hand, whispering with a hint of tears in his voice, "Brother Alex, please don't be okay." It had to be said that Alex was very good with children, and Max trusted him very much. A familiar electric current once again flowed from Max's little hand to Alex's palm, flowing down his arm and throughout his body, numbing and tingling. The same feeling instantly reminded Alex of yesterday morning. Alex looked down at Max, a thought suddenly crossing his mind. Could this ability to control metal be absorbed from Max? Will it disappear after a while? Thinking this, Alex once again turned his gaze to the metal sheet beside the bed. As expected, it was warped. "I'm not Magneto, but Rogue." Alex recalled the Rogue from the movie, whose ability was to absorb the abilities of others and use them for his own. "That's not bad, I can use different abilities." Thinking of Rogue, Alex's expression suddenly changed again. He looked down at Max, noticing that he was perfectly fine, no change at all. Why isn't Max reacting at all? In the movie, anyone touched by Rogue was sucked to ecstasy. Even Wolverine, with his exceptional self-healing abilities, nearly died at her hands. Before Alex could figure it out, Jacob dragged him out of the brick house. If they were any later, they would be beaten. That day, Alex and Max interacted several times, a tingling, electric sensation recurring each time. The pleasurable sensation gave Alex the illusion of soaring into the clouds. Max, on the other hand, remained completely unresponsive, not even a flicker of expression. That evening, after a piece of black bread, Alex pulled Max into a corner, clutching a piece of metal he had taken from the bed. "Max, try controlling this metal." Alex worried that absorbing Max's powers would harm him, that he might lose them, and he needed to test them. Max looked at Alex in surprise, unsure of what he meant. "Focus on this metal. Use your thoughts, your will, whatever it is. Think to yourself, control it, control it." Alex's telekinesis was immense, allowing him to manipulate metal quickly and skillfully. But Max couldn't, he needed practice. Although he didn't understand, he still followed Alex's instructions. For a long time, the metal remained motionless. Rage. Alex was a little disappointed, and another idea popped into his head. This was the same method used by Sebastian Shaw in the movie to stimulate Magneto's power. "Your mother and sister were murdered by the thugs. You want revenge, you want to kill them all." Alex hadn't finished speaking when he felt a metal piece in his hand slowly fly up. "Okay, Max, remember this feeling." Alex patted Max, awakening him from his anger. Alex didn't want Max to live in anger all his life. "Learn and control this ability. It's the only way we can leave here." Chapter 20, Seizing Auschwitz. Over the next few days, Alex spent every spare moment training Max in his metal manipulation abilities. Over the course of several days, Max made tremendous progress, turning a single piece of metal into practically anything he could imagine, worthy of the feared future Magneto. Alex himself was also busy, honing his psychic powers while constantly exploring and researching his own special abilities. In Chinatown, Alex had learned that his mother was most likely a mutant. His sudden emergence of special abilities undoubtedly stemmed from this body, derived from the X gene within him, just as Max's. Being able to absorb the metal manipulation abilities from Max without harming him was distinct from the abilities of the little rascals. Alex came up with a word to describe it: replication. It wasn't about stripping or plundering, but simply copying Max's abilities without damaging them. However, this replication wasn't permanent, it had a duration. A single replication, or touch, lasted approximately 4 hours before the ability was lost. Repeated replications multiplied the duration. However, after 3 or more replications, the effect ceased. Therefore, theoretically, Alex's maximum metal manipulation ability was 32 hours. Of course, as long as Max was by Alex's side, Alex could continue to control metal. All Alex had to do was touch Max's body again when his power faded. After understanding his own abilities, Alex began to prepare for his escape. "Alex, are you ready to leave?" One night, while everyone else was fast asleep, Jacob climbed out of bed and spoke gravely to Alex, who was still awake. Jacob observed the changes in his son and attributed them all to Alex. In his eyes, Alex also became mysteriously powerful. Alex glanced around, nodded, and said, Okay, I'll take you all away with me then. Through persistent practice, his teleportation abilities improved again, reaching a range of 6 kilometers, and it only took a minute to transmit again. Even with 4 people, Alex was confident he could leave Auschwitz with them. Once they left the camp, with their metal control abilities at their disposal, they would be like a bird returning to the mountains or a dragon swimming in the sea, unstoppable. Before I leave, I'm going to kill White Glove. Jacob's voice was low, his face barely visible in the dark brick building. Only his eyes gleamed with a fierce, predatory glint. White Glove, that was the nickname the inmates of the concentration camp had given Rudolf Fernandi. Alex opened his mouth to refuse, but looking into Jacob's eyes, his throat seemed to clog. After a moment's hesitation, he finally nodded and said, "Okay, but everything depends on me." Watching Jacob crawl back into his bed, Alex's face was bitter. He agreed readily, but the task was incredibly complex. Alex had originally planned to take the 4 of them and escape the camp under cover of night, unnoticed. By the time the police discovered them, it would be the next morning, making it difficult for them to catch up. Even if they were caught, Alex, with his metal manipulation abilities, remained unfazed. But Jacob's request was simply too much for Alex to refuse. Despite the risk of exposing their whereabouts prematurely, Alex had no choice but to agree to fulfill Jacob's wish. 2 days later, a new group of inmates arrived at the concentration camp, reportedly prisoners of war from the front, totaling 4,000. That day, the White Gloves went on another killing spree, massacring 300 prisoners at once in front of the death wall. He did it all himself, with a man in front carrying a machine gun while he frantically fired from behind. In his killing spree, the White Gloves even turned their machine guns on the women working outside the clearing. From a distance, Alex watched with rage. Audrey and Ella were among them. "Max, do it." Alex habitually touched Max's shoulder, then his teleportation vanished. As Alex vanished, a flicker of excitement crossed Max's face. His hands moved, and the guards around them fell to the ground, howling in pain. Their steel helmets were crushed against their heads, crushing their fragile skulls. This was the method Alex had taught Max. It was simple, convenient, and unexpected, offering the fastest and most effective solution to the enemy's insurrection. Jacob paused for a moment, then snapped back to his senses, roaring, "Fellow soldiers, pick up your guns. Let's fight our way out." A month of hellish training had eroded the heroic spirit of most men, and they remained unmoved by Jacob's words. However, many excitedly grabbed their weapons and joined the resistance. While Jacob was motivating the men, Max, mindful of Alex's instructions, immediately turned his attention to the surrounding sentries, dispatching them instantly before they could react. Alex didn't bother to check if Max followed his instructions. After the teleportation ended, he appeared in the center of the clearing, in front of White Gloves. White Gloves, however, gripped his machine gun with both hands, ready to fire. Unconcerned with whoever suddenly appeared before him, White Gloves' machine gun roared, unleashing dozens of rounds in a barrage of bullets. Alex flew into a rage, roaring, "White Gloves, you deserve to die." Then something strange happened. The bullet stopped less than 10 centimeters from Alex. Alex looked at White Gloves coldly, then flicked his right hand, sending all the bullets flying, aiming for the still stuck soldiers around him. Like legendary elven arrows, the bullets deftly pierced the heads of one soldier after another, showering blood. In an instant, nearly 100 soldiers lay dead on the ground, none of them knowing how they died. White Glove snapped back to his senses, roared, and fired his machine gun again. The same scene repeated itself, but this time, Alex aimed at the soldiers farther away. Anyone holding a gun, Alex delivered a bullet. "Put down your guns, or you'll die." Alex's threat was effective, and all the soldiers who were about to draw their weapons tactfully lowered them. "What are you standing there for? Get your guns." Alex then looked at the newly arrived prisoners. Despite his unrestrained demeanor, Alex was in deep pain. His mental energy was rapidly draining, and his soul was beginning to strain. "Secure this area immediately. Don't let the soldiers from the other concentration camps find out." Auschwitz was a vast expanse. Alex was in the main camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau. There were 2 other main camps and 39 smaller camps or factories nearby. The prisoners, after all, were not ordinary people. They quickly recovered, confiscating all the soldiers' weapons and seizing the high ground. Over 3,000 prisoners quickly secured the main camp, imprisoned all the soldiers, and released all the prisoners, seeing the situation under control. Alex finally gave up and collapsed to the ground. Chapter 21 Decision Making. When Alex awoke, it was already the next morning. Gazing at the ornate surroundings, Alex was bewildered. Had I finally escaped the horrors of Auschwitz? Just as he was wondering, a joyful voice echoed beside him. It was Audrey Hepburn. "Brother, you're finally awake." Audrey had changed her clothes and, after a quick wash, her face brightened. Seeing Alex awake, she ran over joyfully. Behind her, Ella and a middle-aged man slowly approached. Alex, looking at the upright figure, had a vague impression of him. "Who are you, Toby Mans? Thank you for saving us yesterday." The middle-aged man approached Alex's bedside and gave a formal military salute, his face brimming with gratitude. Alex snapped back to reality, pushing himself to sit up. He peered through the window beside the bed. Beyond the clear glass lay a gloomy building and a vast expanse of empty space. Gazing at the familiar yet unfamiliar scene, Alex suddenly realized he was in the three-story building of the White Gloves. "How's the concentration camp going?" Alex took a deep breath, leaping from the bed and gathering himself while looking at Toby Mans. "Everything's under control," Toby Mans said, his voice suddenly serious. "But getting out of here," Toby trailed off. Auschwitz was in Poland, deep behind a German-occupied zone, making escape extremely difficult. "I know that," Alex said helplessly. 4 or 5 people would be a smaller target, making escape easier. But the situation was unforgiving. He hadn't expected it to turn out like this. Alex couldn't possibly escape secretly while Audrey and Ella were away. He gathered himself and exited the building. He glanced at the death wall across the clearing. After a moment's pause, he finally asked, "Have the other concentration camps nearby noticed anything unusual here?" "No, they didn't even send anyone to take a look." Toby felt relieved that the commotion yesterday hadn't attracted any police to investigate. He was truly lucky. If someone dies or a gun is fired here, no one will care. Alex walked out of the small building and headed for the office building to the side. "Is everyone else okay? Are the prisoners in custody?" "Don't worry, everything's fine," Toby nodded, wanting to say something but stopping himself. Alex noticed Toby's expression and felt a little puzzled. "What's wrong? We captured about 20,000 people this time. The others were probably sent to other concentration camps. I think sleepiness came with a pillow." After seizing the entire Auschwitz concentration camp, Alex naturally couldn't escape alone. He needed to find a way to rescue everyone in the camp, but the people in this camp alone were clearly not enough. But with 20,000 more prisoners, the significance would be different. But before that, Alex had more important things to do. Before Toby could finish, Alex waved his hand, interrupting him. "Okay, I got it. We'll get them out." With that, Alex walked into the office building and searched for a moment before finding a telegraph machine. Alex quickly sent a string of Morse code, waiting for a reply as he turned to Audrey, who had been following him. "Audrey, where's Max?" "He's resting. He passed out not long after you fainted yesterday." It wasn't Audrey who spoke, but Ella, who was standing beside him. After yesterday's battle, she truly understood Alex's strength and felt more confident leaving Audrey in his care. Alex nodded, then turned to Toby. "How many guns and ammunition are there in the concentration camp?" "The concentration camp's ammunition reserves aren't large, only enough for 1,000 people. The ammunition depot Toby first found upon taking over the camp was unfortunately empty, with only enough ammunition to sustain the camp's daily needs. We should be able to launch a surprise attack, right?" Alex frowned, a hint of worry. "More than enough," Toby, having guessed what Alex was planning, couldn't help but smile. "Okay, send someone to prepare and try to find some good guys." As he was talking, the telegraph responded. Looking at the message sent back, Alex frowned again. This time we're in trouble. In 1940, Germany and the Soviet Union had not yet gone to war, which made Alex's original plan to take people to escape to the Soviet Union completely empty talk. The Soviet Union would not take the risk of offending the mustache and accept his group of fugitives. After finding a map in the office, Alex stared at the map for a long time, feeling a little headache. After all, he was not a professional. Seeing Toby beside him, he quickly pulled him over, pointed at the map and said, "Toby, see if there's any way to fight our way out." Auschwitz is located in Poland, in the rear of the German-occupied area. It is quite close to the Soviet Union, but it is too far away from France, almost across half of the European continent. Toby smiled bitterly and shook his head. There's no other option but to flee to the Soviet Union. Forget about that, Alex said dejectedly, waving the telegram in his hand. The Soviets won't agree. Alex had sent the telegram to Howard, hoping he could establish a relationship with the Soviets so they could escape. Unfortunately, Howard had given him tragic news. Germany and the Soviet Union had long been secretly colluding and would definitely not agree. Toby cursed under his breath and said with resignation, "Then we can only fight our way back, looking for death." Alex rolled his eyes in annoyance. This place was thousands of miles from the German-French front, and this was Japanese territory. Fighting back was easy to say, but they were afraid they would be surrounded by the Japanese within a few steps. Just then, the telegraph chimed again. Alex stared at the decrypted message, then at the map on the table. He paused for a moment before handing the letter to Toby. "Take a look. Is this feasible?" Toby took the letter, glanced at it, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He then looked down at the map, then looked back at Alex. "It's possible, but it's very dangerous. It's better than staying in this hellish place." Alex couldn't help but shout with excitement. Finally, they could escape this hellish place. Toby nodded, then asked with a hint of doubt, "Are you sure your friend can do it? If we move, there's no turning back." Alex waved his hand confidently, pointing to the letter and saying, "Do you know who he is? Howard Stark, America's largest arms dealer. This wouldn't be a problem for him." Toby smiled. "That's reassuring. P.S. Scorpio doesn't have any drafts saved, and I'm writing now and need to research. Please forgive the late update. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 22 Metal. As Alex stepped off the train, a tall, muscular white man ran over with long, quick strides, his white fur falling from his head as he jolted. He didn't seem to mind, but excitedly approached and embraced Alex, who hadn't reacted yet, mumbling something Alex couldn't understand. He held Alex for a full 10 seconds before reluctantly letting him go. Alex was completely stunned by the man's actions, especially the incomprehensible language he spoke. He turned to look at the slightly hunched figure behind him. It was none other than the interpreter at Auschwitz. Alex had killed all the prisoners at Auschwitz, and the interpreter was originally slated to be killed as well. However, the interpreter, fearing death, shared many secrets, which played a significant role in Alex's ability to intercept the coal train. He explained that he wasn't an interpreter, but rather a confidential secretary at the concentration camp, possessing extensive military secrets. He had been temporarily assigned to the interpreter role because of his multilingual proficiency. Alex hesitated for a moment before keeping him. Each Nordic country has its own language, and Alex worried he wouldn't be able to communicate in Finland, so he kept him. However, as a precaution, he was mostly guarded by 2 soldiers. They only released him just before getting off the bus, as Alex thought he might need an interpreter. As expected, Alex didn't understand the white man's first words. He turned to the interpreter. "Noel, what did he say?" he said. "Welcome, Alex," the interpreter, Noel, said respectfully, without any of the arrogance he had initially encountered. "You know my name." Alex was a little surprised. After a moment's thought, he said, "Ask him who he is." Noel stepped forward to exchange a few words with the white man, then stepped back. He leaned over behind Alex and whispered, "He's Neil Grand, a Finnish general, and he's here specifically to pick you up, specially to pick me up." Could it be Howard? Alex had no idea how much of a sensation his group had caused internationally, and upon hearing the news, he assumed Howard had orchestrated it. In fact, when Alex escaped Auschwitz with 70,000 prisoners of war and civilians, Howard had begun to publicize it. The escape, led by Alex, garnered widespread international attention and was dubbed the greatest escape in history. Under international pressure, the Soviet Union had no choice but to turn a blind eye to the train, allowing it to pass through the 3 Baltic states. "He didn't say that, but he invited us to travel to Finland immediately," Noel said, his head slightly lowered, his face invisible. Over 2 hours later, under nearly 100 Finnish ships, 70,000 people orderly departed Estonia and set foot on Finland's snow-covered land. From beginning to end, the local Estonian government remained silent, completely treating these 70,000 people as invisible. This disappointed Toby Mans, who had expected a tough battle. After wrapping Audrey in a thick fur coat, Alex turned to Neil Grant beside him and asked, somewhat puzzled, Mr. Grant, how long will it take before we see the Norwegian Sea? After a night's rest in Helsinki, the group boarded another train for Finland's northernmost tip. From there, they would sail across the Barents Sea and back to England. In 2 hours we'll be in Inari, where you can take a boat out to sea. Neil, though imposing, was actually quite kind. With a gentle smile on his face. Oh, that's great. I can finally go home. After a few months out, Alex was truly homesick. He missed his good friend Steve and Bucky, and his little sister, Marilyn Monroe. Alex, I'm afraid you'll have to stay in England for a few more days. At this moment, Toby hurried over, his face full of jealousy. Mr. Churchill has invited you to dinner, and His Majesty the King is going to personally present you with the Victoria Cross. The Victoria Cross? Oh my God, it's the Victoria Cross. What? Alex looked at Toby in surprise. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I really hope so. Toby rolled his eyes at Alex and casually handed him the letter. There are also rumors that even the US government is going to award you the Medal of Honor. That's impossible? I didn't do anything. Alex was very self-conscious. He really didn't feel that he had anything to be praised for. Saving 70,000 prisoners of war and civilians is already a huge achievement, Neil said enviously. Noel faithfully translated Neil's envy. In fact, he was also very envious. But I didn't do this alone. Toby and the other soldiers, Alex said, turning to Neil. Of course, your help was indispensable. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to leave the European continent. You have the ability to escape alone, but you stayed. Most people can't do that. Toby looked at Alex seriously. The Victoria Cross, it's yours. Toby had witnessed Alex's abilities firsthand. He could have left at any time if he wanted, but Alex chose to stay, choosing to escape from Auschwitz with 70,000 people, a perilous journey across thousands of miles. You make me feel a little proud when you say that, Alex chuckled, his mind suddenly reminiscing about his past life. In his past life, Zhang Xuan was just an ordinary homebody, a bit of an angry young man. Fortunately, he possessed the ability of teleportation, but he didn't use it to make a fortune or punish evil. He simply used it as a convenient way to travel, taking back some treasures that belonged to China when he had the chance. That was all. The most drastic act Zhang Xuan had ever committed was after the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands incident, when, in a rage, he burned down Yasukuni Shrine. Of course, no one knew Zhang Xuan was responsible for this, and there wasn't even a mention of it online or on TV. It was as if it had never happened. Sometimes Zhang Xuan relished the loneliness of being an unknown hero, but sometimes, he longed to be celebrated and praised. In his previous life, Zhang Xuan remained unknown until his death, his deeds unknown. In this life, in just a few months, his name had spread throughout the world. British Prime Minister Churchill wanted to dine with him, and the British royal family wanted to honor him. Just thinking about it made Zhang Xuan excited. He loved this feeling. In this life, I don't want to be unknown anymore. Alex, arms outstretched, braving the cold wind, cried out in his heart, I want to be a hero admired by everyone. P.S. Thanks to my classmate, how can I become a Buddha if I'm not crazy? For the tip, and to all the friends who support Scorpio. Chapter 23, The Red Skull Returns. When the train stopped, Alex's first sight was the endless expanse of turquoise water outside the window. He asked in astonishment, is this the Norwegian Sea? Neil chuckled and explained, this is Lake Inari. It's still a long way from the Norwegian Sea. Alex wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't a geography major, so it was normal for him not to know. He laughed a few times, letting the matter slip away, but he was still filled with confusion. Neil seemed to sense Alex's confusion and explained, northern Finland isn't connected to the sea. It's surrounded by Norway and the Soviet Union. To reach the sea, you can only take a boat from Inari, cross Lake Inari, and enter the Barents Sea via the Potts River. Then, you can go around to the Norwegian Sea and return to the UK after a brief pause. Neil frowned, saying with some concern, the Potts River flows through Norway. I'm afraid the Norwegians will try to stop it. Alex's brow furrowed as well. Norway was now German-occupied, and its geographical location was crucial. The mustache held this territory in high regard, even supporting a puppet government. Leaving his territory seemed a bit difficult. Don't worry too much, though. Finnmark belongs to northern Norway, and Quisling's control here is weak, so it shouldn't be a problem. Seeing Alex's worried expression, Neil offered solace. However, his sudden change only made Alex even more worried. To conserve transport capacity and avoid appearing too conspicuous, 70,000 people were packed onto 10 ships, making it a bit crowded. Thankfully, none of them complained. After enduring the brutal torture of Auschwitz, they were grateful to have escaped. 7 ships formed a long line and sailed out of Inari dock, heading towards the port's river, downstream of Lake Inari. Neil continued to accompany the ships, bringing 2,000 Finnish soldiers with him to guard them. These 2,000 would serve as Finland's garrison in the Allied powers, in exchange for continued British and American military aid. Contrary to history, the Soviet-Finnish War was still ongoing at this point, and even with British and American aid, Finland was still far from running out of ammunition and food. Finland had also fully embraced the Allied cause and would no longer side with the mustache. As the boat sailed out of the Inari River and into the Norwegian territory of the Poets River, Neil grew nervous, and so did Toby. 2,000 Finnish soldiers and 20,000 prisoners of war, spread across 10 ships, kept a vigilant watch. Alex, too, grew cautious. His intuition again warned him of approaching danger, but the feeling came and went, leaving him unable to judge. After a mostly uneventful journey, with a vast expanse of sea just before them, something unexpected happened. A thick iron chain lay across the mouth of the Poets River, blocking the way out to the sea. Seeing this, Alex's heart skipped a beat, knowing trouble was brewing. "I'll deal with these chains," Alex said, teleporting to the chains. Using his ability to control a metal, the chains, as thick as his arm, quickly fell into the Poets River, clearing the waterway once again. Alex was about to turn back when he suddenly noticed countless bullets and shells hurling out from the dense forests on both sides. Alex's face dropped. 10 ships carrying 70,000 men weren't warships, but ordinary merchant ships. If they were hit, they'd be lost to the sea. Without a second thought, Alex quickly channeled his psychic power and immediately activated his metal control, doing his utmost to block all the bullets and shells. Simultaneously, Alex launched a counterattack, redirecting some of the shells. The barrage of artillery fire slowed the attacks from both sides. Alex continued to exert his strength, and under his control, the bullets seemed to have eyes, darting through the dense forest, killing one soldier after another. In a moment, the sound of gunfire from both sides ceased completely, and Alex, instantly exhausted, plunged headfirst into the turbulent Pats River below, disappearing in an instant. After all, controlling metal wasn't Alex's own ability. He'd copied it from Max, like a coded document. Until it was cracked, Alex could only use his telekinesis to control it. Within minutes, Alex's telekinetic energy was quickly depleted, and naturally, he passed out. Seeing Alex fall into the river, Toby's face dropped. Just as he was about to send men down to search, Neil shouted, "Go! Quick! While the enemy's firing is down. If it's too late, over 70,000 people will die." Toby's face darkened, and he roared, "You take them away, I'll go find Alex." Without waiting for Neil's reply, he leaped into the swift water. Astonishingly, nearly 100 people followed suit, jumping into the icy, swift water without a moment's hesitation. Glancing at Toby, who had slipped deep into the river, Neil clenched his fists and roared from the depths of his chest, "Go!" On the banks of the Pats River, beside an armored vehicle, a slender, distinguished-looking military officer in a black leather trench coat clutched a pair of binoculars, a smile of excitement on his face. "Was that the teleporter just now? I didn't expect he had other abilities. It's truly surprising. Find him no matter what. Dead or alive." The officer lowered his binoculars, his smile growing deeper. Strangely, his cheeks seemed to droop slightly, revealing the red skin beneath. It was none other than Red Skull, donning his human skin mask once more. "But, sir, the Führer's orders are..." Red Skull's confidential secretary approached, a look of worry on his face. "Forget those boats. Follow my orders, now." Red Skull's expression suddenly changed, his aura radiating a powerful force that made the confidential secretary tremble. A flawless poem, a single post, a single content, a single 6 to 9 book, a single forum. A moment later, someone arrived with a report, "Sir, the river is raging." Before the man could finish, Red Skull grabbed the man's neck with one hand, slowly lifted him up, and sternly declared, "I don't need an excuse, I just want the man. Find him now." With a flick of his hand, Red Skull's neck snapped. This move terrified everyone, and regardless of the icy water, They rushed madly into the river, searching in a dragnet. Finally, as darkness fell, they found Alex's corpse and captured Toby and the other 100 men who had gone down into the river to search for him. Red Skull's men were all highly skilled agents, so dealing with Toby and his men was easy. "Sir, we have news." Seeing a group of agents carrying Alex's body approaching, Red Skull was about to go over to investigate when his confidential secretary leaned over again, his voice still trembling. "In Tonsberg, Vestfold County." Upon hearing this, Red Skull suddenly turned around, no longer bothering to study the teleporter. He clutched the confidential secretary tightly with both hands, his face twisted with excitement. It's been years, and finally there's news. At this moment, a group of agents approached, carrying Alex's body, accompanied by a group of soldiers. They were none other than the dejected Toby and the others. Glancing at the unconscious Alex, then at Toby and the others, Red Skull thought for a moment and said, "Send them all back to base and lock them up." Pointing at Alex, he sternly warned, "Watch out for his teleportation. If he gets away, watch out for your heads." With that, Red Skull got into the armored vehicle and rushed impatiently to Tonsberg, where he would find the treasure he had been pursuing his whole life. Alex was nothing compared to this babe. Chapter 24 Base Laboratory. When Alex awoke, he found himself trapped in a sealed box. The cramped space left him no room to move, and the surroundings were pitch black, devoid of any light. Something seemed to be encasing his head, and his mouth was forced open. Alex tried to move his head or close his mouth, but it was impossible. "I've been captured." Alex only had a fleeting thought to grasp his predicament. Thinking Audrey might still be in danger, Alex was instantly filled with anxiety. Just as he was about to use teleportation to escape, a flash of light suddenly shone in front of him. The blinding light forced Alex to close his eyes, interrupting his teleportation. Just then, a straw was thrust roughly into his mouth. Alex tried to spit it out, but a thick, musty-smelling liquid rushed down the straw into his mouth, then down his throat and into his stomach. A nauseous urge to vomit washed over him, and Alex dry heaved a few times before passing out. Whenever Alex woke, the straw would immediately be inserted into his mouth, and the nauseating liquid would flow into his stomach, and then Alex would fall asleep. This cycle repeated itself countless times, and after countless drinks of the strange liquid, Alex finally woke one day to find himself no longer in the small, dark, sealed box. Instead, he was trapped in a spacious glass room. Beyond the glass room lay a laboratory, filled with a variety of experimental equipment. The laboratory was completely sealed, with no windows, so Alex could not see the outside world. In his previous life, Zhang Zhuan had trained his teleportation to the point where he could appear anywhere on Earth with a single thought, as long as he remembered the place, whether he had visited it in person, seen it in photos, or online. But now, Alex couldn't do that. The limited range forced him to seek out familiar places nearby. On the European continent, the only places Alex knew were those he had traveled to along the way. But just now, Alex had tried every place he remembered, and the transmission failed. Just as Alex was feeling frustrated, the lab's iron door swung open. He eagerly looked inside, only to discover a long, narrow corridor lined with armed police. There was still no escape. Alex glanced back at the man who had just entered the lab. Standing just over a meter tall, he looked almost like a dwarf, minus the long beard. He wore glasses and a serious expression, looking incredibly ridiculous. "What's so funny, teleporter?" The dwarf noticed the smile on Alex's face and his expression suddenly changed. "Anyone who dares to underestimate Zora will die, Zora." "Dr. Zora." Alex was startled by the words, immediately remembering the short doctor in the movie who helped Red Skull research the Tesseract. Judging by his height, he must be the man before him. "Boy, I'll show you how powerful I am." Zora laughed harshly, turned, and walked away into a corner. A moment later, he emerged wearing a long gray trench coat and a ridiculous eye patch, looking like a giant version of Shuk. Alex couldn't help but smile as Zora slowly approached, a smile he felt a bit apprehensive. Despite his comical appearance, Zora possessed considerable abilities, otherwise Red Skull wouldn't have valued him. Alex worried he'd be experimenting on him. "Get some sleep, kid." Zora smiled at Alex, pressing a red button on a machine near the glass room. Alex immediately remembered the strange liquid he'd been swallowing. Just as he was on guard, puffs of green smoke suddenly erupted. Alex, knowing something was amiss, covered his nose with his hand. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to help. Alex felt his head grow dizzy, and he collapsed to the ground again. When Alex awoke, he found himself lying on the cold floor, limp and weak. Sitting up seemed difficult, and a faint tingling sensation lingered in his right arm. He rolled up his sleeve and saw a pinprick. Looking out of the glass room, the short Zora was holding a glass test tube, 1/3 filled with blood. Noticing Alex had woken up, Zora turned to look at him, his ridiculous eye patch still on. "Boy, you woke up pretty quickly. You woke up so quickly after drawing 2,000 milliliters of blood. You're in good shape." Alex ignored Zora and sat weakly on the ground, looking around, hoping to find a way out. Alex didn't think about the door. With so many soldiers guarding it, there was no way Alex could escape. The lab had no windows, but there must be a vent, and that's where Alex was looking. A vent would definitely connect to the outside world. If Alex could just get a glimpse of the outside world, he could use teleportation to escape. After searching for a while, Alex found a vent in the ceiling on one side of the lab. A faint sound of wind emanated from the small vent. Seeing the vent's location, Alex felt a heavy heart. It seemed the lab was most likely underground. "Wait until Zora leaves before I go out and check." Alex made up his mind and lay down comfortably, closing his eyes and pretending to doze. Seeing Alex's lack of movement, Zora ignored him, concentrating on his experiment. An unknown amount of time passed, but when Alex awoke, the entire lab was deserted. Alex immediately used teleportation to leave the glass room, ran to the vent, found a table, and climbed on it. He peered out into darkness, seeing nothing. Disappointed, Alex jumped off the table and wandered around the lab, searching for a long time but finding nothing. Unwilling to despair, Alex carefully made his way to the door and, cautiously, slid the massive iron door open a crack. He peered through the gap and saw a long, narrow passageway filled with people. Alex cursed inwardly, closed the door again, and reluctantly returned to his glass room, where he fell asleep, his heart pounding with confusion. Bang, bang, bang. The incessant banging startled Alex from his sleep. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, he gazed at the suddenly bustling lab. Yesterday, it had been just him and Zora in the vast lab, but today, there were suddenly many more people. They looked like scientists like Zora, and there were also some soldiers coming in and out, helping to move things. After a busy day, the soldiers had all left the lab, but a dozen or so scientists remained. Also, a tall man wearing a military cap remained. Judging by his appearance, he must be the leader. Everyone treated him with respect. Alex suspected he was Johann Schmidt, also known as the Red Skull, from the movies. Dr. Zora, I found everything you need, and everyone you need. When can it be ready, General Schmidt? It'll only take 2 days, Zora spoke cautiously to the leader, his tone much lower. Hearing Zora's address, Alex confirmed his guess that the person in front of him was the future Red Skull. Okay, I hope to see what I want in 2 days. The Red Skull looked at Zora with a cold expression. His tone was indifferent, but it made Zora's body tremble slightly. After waiting for a long time for the Red Skull to turn his head, Zora breathed a sigh of relief, pointed at Alex in the glass room and asked, General Schmidt, what about him? The Red Skull turned his head and looked over. After hesitating for a moment, he said, keep him and use him as an experimental subject. After that, the Red Skull turned and walked out of the laboratory. Okay, Zora responded in a low voice. Seeing the Red Skull leave, he immediately took the other dozen scientists to get busy. P.S. Sorry, the update is late. I will catch up with the second update immediately. Chapter 25 Cosmic Cube. Alex lay in the glass room, watching Zora work for 2 days as a strangely shaped machine gradually took shape. It looked like the machine that converted the energy of the Tesseract. Suddenly, Alex's impatience subsided. He waited for the Red Skull to appear with the Tesseract. On the third day, the Red Skull appeared in the lab on time. Zora was the only one left in the lab. The other scientists had been dismissed. Red Skull set the wooden box aside and looked at Zora, who was adjusting the machine. He asked anxiously, Are you ready, Dr. Zora? This instrument requires extremely precise calibration. Zora paused, then continued, Excuse me, I have to make sure everything is foolproof. Red Skull flipped through the materials on the lab table with boredom. He turned to look at Zora and asked with some concern, Are you sure those soldiers can withstand this energy surge? Can they tolerate this deformation? With this device, I can't be sure of anything, Zora said with a hint of regret, walking around the main body of the machine and coming to the front. I'm even worried it won't work at all. Alex leaned casually against the glass wall of the glass room, leisurely watching the nervous Zora and Red Skull. He was thinking about attacking them in the chaos and then escaping with the power of the Tesseract. At this moment, Red Skull opened the wooden box, and a brilliant blue light burst out, dazzling and captivating. This was the legendary Tesseract, the supreme treasure left to Earth by Odin, the Lord of Asgard. Red Skull grasped the glowing cosmic cube with pliers and placed it into the carrier at the back of the machine. Then, with anticipation, he turned to look at Zora. Zora snapped out of her daze, donned a ridiculous eye mask, and carefully turned the dial on the instrument. 20%, 40%, 60%, stabilized at 70%. Zora tried to stop, but the aggressive Red Skull wouldn't let him. He rushed forward, pushing Zora aside, and rapidly twisted the knob with his right hand. I didn't spend all this time on safety, Doctor. Suddenly, the cosmic cube erupted with even more intense light. Wisps of blue light spread along the wires throughout the laboratory, bathing the entire lab in a shimmering azure light. Red Skull and Zora were stunned by the scene before them. Now, Alex whispered, his teleportation instantly activated. He suddenly appeared behind Red Skull, grabbed a nearby hammer, and smashed it down on Red Skull's head with all his might. In the film, the Red Skull and Captain America battled each other in a fierce duel, each one incredibly powerful. Alex tried desperately to score a single blow. However, to Alex's horror, the Red Skull stumbled after the hammer strike, but he didn't collapse. He quickly turned around, and a piece of skin seemed to collapse, peeling off his face, revealing a bright red complexion beneath. "Boy, you're courting death," the Red Skull roared, charging forward with the force of a tiger. Alex, having never learned martial arts in his 2 lives, was no match for the Red Skull. Seeing the Red Skull charging towards him, he quickly dropped his hammer and ran. Witnessing the Red Skull's power, Alex was filled with fear. In a panic, he ran to the Tesseract's container. Glancing down at the Tesseract, then at the rapidly approaching Red Skull, Alex, helpless, grabbed the Tesseract with both hands. Alex remembered that the Tesseract, in addition to possessing infinite energy, also possessed the power of space, capable of opening portals. At the end of the movie Captain America, Red Skull was teleported away by the Tesseract. In the Avengers, Loki used the Tesseract to open a dimensional portal, attracting the Chitauri. Alex wasn't sure if he could open the Tesseract's dimensional portal, nor where it would take him. But faced with this situation, Alex had no choice but to take a risk. A rainbow-like light suddenly burst forth from the Tesseract, completely enveloping Alex. A moment later, the rainbow light vanished, and Alex vanished with it. The Tesseract suddenly dimmed and fell from mid-air, instantly dissolving a crater of the same size into the ground. Red Skull and Zora were stunned for a moment before coming to their senses. One hurriedly picked up the Tesseract, while the other, trembling with fear, approached Red Skull and whispered, "What just happened? Why did he disappear so suddenly?" "I know it wasn't teleportation." Putting the Tesseract back away, Red Skull turned to Zora. Just as he was about to speak, he noticed a blue energy block suddenly appear on the other side of the machine. It looked remarkably similar to the Tesseract. "Congratulations, Arnim," Red Skull excitedly pulled Zora aside, pointing to the blue energy block not far away. "Your design didn't disappoint," he glanced around and added, "it still needs a little reinforcement, though." Zora was equally excited, staring intently at the blue energy block, his pride evident. "The conversion process is incredibly stable, amazing. This energy source you described makes all my designs a reality," Zora said, excitedly removing his eye patch. "This will change the war, Dr. Zora, this will change the world," Red Skull declared with unwavering ambition. While Red Skull and Zora were excited about the successful energy conversion, Alex felt like he'd just woken up from a dream, finding himself lying on his bed in his Brooklyn apartment. After a long pause, Alex finally came to his senses. Looking down at his leather jacket, he finally confirmed he wasn't dreaming. He'd truly returned from Europe to New York in an instant, covering over 6,000 kilometers in an instant. Could it be the Cosmic Cube? Alex was astonished, attributing it to the Cosmic Cube. Maybe it was also my teleportation. Alex remembered that when he grabbed the Cosmic Cube, his mind had just started thinking of his home. Whatever, I'm glad I'm back. Alex shook his head, clearing away the chaotic thoughts in his mind. He chuckled softly and consoled himself, perhaps I should let them know I'm safe. As soon as he finished speaking, Alex suddenly realized that his sudden return to the United States from Europe was a bit horrifying, and he needed a reason. After much deliberation, Alex couldn't come up with any acceptable excuse. He couldn't help but complain, if only they had sent me to England, it would have saved him all this trouble. As soon as he'd finished speaking, Alex found himself no longer in his Brooklyn apartment, but standing on a street. Overhead, dark clouds gathered, and it seemed as if rain was imminent. Even the air was humid. Is this London? Alex stared blankly at the strange yet familiar streetscape around him, as if it were the same street he'd walked on his first trip to London. How did I end up here? Standing there for a moment, Alex suddenly thought of a possibility. Has my teleportation been restored? In a flash. 1,000 miles away. The thought of his Brooklyn apartment reappeared in his mind, and Alex vanished from the London streets and was instantly back in his Brooklyn apartment. It's really restored. Alex couldn't help but jump up with excitement, roaring out his boundless joy. Cosmic Cube, I love you so much. P.S. My second update from yesterday is only now available. I'm so sorry. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.